Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has been agreed with the return of all hostages. Trump's picks for Attorney General and Secretary of State face the US Senate as Washington prepares security for next week's inauguration. And South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol is arrested and sent to a detention centre near Seoul 6 weeks after attempting to impose martial law. To our top story, and a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. The agreement includes a return of hostages on both sides and a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from central Gaza. Qatar's foreign ministry is due to hold a press conference in Doha imminently. We can now go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent there, Sarah Coates. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Reports from the last 15 minutes from Axios and other news organisations suggest a deal has been agreed between Hamas and Israel over a ceasefire. What are we hearing? What do we know?
Hello there, Leigh Ann. That is certainly right. It is being widely reported here in Israeli media that a deal has finally been reached after 15 months of fighting and more than 46,000 people killed in Gaza. What we do know is that this would be a three-phase deal. The first phase of the deal, it would last for 6 weeks. It would see 33 of these Israeli hostages released. They would be women, children, men over the age of 50, and the sick and the elderly. Of course, this is still breaking news. There is still no formal announcement made on this, but as you mentioned, we can expect that to happen in the minutes, in potentially the hours to come. It is expected to be announced by Qatar's Prime Minister in Doha, where these negotiations have been ongoing now for days. But certainly, once again, good news. After 15 months of fighting, it does appear that this long war that has killed more than 46,000 people in Gaza could be coming to an end. Now, we also do understand that Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, he has been in Europe on a trip. He's cut that trip short. He is on his way back to Israel because tomorrow there will be a cabinet vote to push this through. It is expected to pass with a majority. So once again, breaking news. It does appear as though a deal has finally been made, Leigh Ann.
I know that you did mention that an official announcement has not been made, but could be imminent from the Qatari Prime Minister. Any idea when we could be expecting him to speak? And is it significant that he is holding this press conference?
Well, of course, it is significant, but this is where the discussions have been taking place. Qatar, throughout this entire process, has been a key mediator in all of this, so it does make sense that he would be making this announcement. As I mentioned, we can expect it in the coming minutes, the coming hours, but certainly, once again, good news. After 15 months of fighting, it would appear that this war is coming to an end. We do know that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, over the last few minutes, he's been holding consultations with his negotiating team who were there in Doha. This is the head of the Shin Bet and also the Mossad spy agency. They've been there hammering out the details of this deal. So certainly throughout the day there was a lot of cautious optimism. Of course, we've been seeing many of these deals, many of these attempts, I should say, going on for the last few months. Many of them have fallen over at the last minute, and this is why there was so much cautious optimism here in Israel, with many people believing that this deal could potentially see the same fate as others. But it would appear as though this one has finally got over the line, and as you mentioned, we are waiting to hear from that announcement from Qatar's Prime Minister very shortly.
And do we know how the Israeli public have been reacting to this deal?
There are certainly mixed reactions here in Israel. Of course, we can expect a lot of jubilation once this announcement is made there in Doha. People have been waiting a very long time, especially the family members of these hostages who are still being held in the Gaza Strip, to see their loved ones returned. But in saying that, there, of course, will be some sadness. There was quite a large rally here in Tel Aviv, Leigh Ann, overnight, people calling for the release of all hostages in one round, not just the release of 33 hostages during the first round. There is a lot of concern among some family members of especially male soldiers and other men being held in Gaza who would be set free during the second phase of this deal, that it might actually fall over before then and they may not see their loved ones released. So in saying that, there will be a lot of emotion here in Israel. There will be a lot of happiness, but also, on the other hand, there will be a lot of concern among the family members of those who will not be being released during this first round, that they may not see their loved ones come out of Gaza at all. But in saying that, hospitals here in Israel have been prepared to be on standby to receive these captives. We can expect once this deal, if this deal does pass through the Israeli cabinet, that it would come into effect within the next 24 to 48 hours. So certainly critical hours ahead here in the Middle East as people wait to see what happens.
Yes, indeed. As you say, just critical hours. Trump has reacted to the news on Truth Social. What role has the incoming Trump admin and, in particular, his incoming special envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, played in brokering this deal, Sarah?
Well, we do need to remember what we did hear from the President-elect Donald Trump when he was re-elected, and that was there would be hell to pay if these hostages are not released by the time he comes back into the White House. And that deadline is fast approaching. We also do need to remember that his new Mideast envoy had a very hard talk with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu around a week ago, and he's really being seen as the one who sort of pushed him into this deal, because what we do need to remember is Benjamin Netanyahu has had many opportunities to actually broker a deal. He's been accused many times of torpedoing a deal for his own political gain. So certainly Mr. Trump is being seen as really a leader here, as someone who's really pushed this deal through. And also in saying that it will be a very good legacy for the outgoing President Joe Biden to actually get this while he's still in the Oval Office. So certainly, once again, critical hours ahead. We are waiting on this announcement from Qatar's Prime Minister. That is expected to happen any moment now from Doha, and we certainly will be following that press conference very closely. Leigh Ann.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for bringing us that breaking news. So we're just hearing a Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached between Hamas and Israel. More on that throughout the show. To Washington now, and there is heightened political tension and an increased threat of violence in the U.S. Capitol as security teams prep for the inauguration on Monday. The president-elect will be sworn in as high-level supporters and tech CEOs watch on. It's just 6 months since an attempt on Donald Trump's life, which saw security protocol tighten. Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
Take a look at what happened.
A security failure made Donald Trump vulnerable. And when a suspect shot at him, he was almost killed at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania in July. A second suspect planning to assassinate him was caught in September. After a divisive political campaign, there's a heightened level of security alert for Inauguration Day, when the president-elect will be sworn in. 25,000 law enforcement officers, including police and military, will be on site to secure the area. Nearly 50 kilometres of black fencing has been put around the Capitol, and security checkpoints will process thousands of spectators expected to attend. Once Mr. Trump officially becomes president again, celebrations will move from Congress to the White House, where bleachers and security gates have been constructed.
Take over, Elijah.
Billionaire Elon Musk, who donated many millions of dollars to the Trump campaign, is attending the inauguration. He will co-lead an efficiency department, or DOGE, tasked with reviewing government budgets to cut back spending under the Trump administration. There are also reports that other tech execs, Sam Altman of OpenAI, Jeff Bezos of Amazon and aerospace company Blue Origin, and Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, will also be watching front and centre on Monday. All have donated to the Trump-Vance inaugural committee setting up events. As the final security preparations proceed outside, hearings are being held inside Congress for Donald Trump's desired cabinet appointees. Pete Hegseth, his pick for Defence Secretary, faced questions on Tuesday about his inexperience and lewd behaviour. Senate hearings for other picks continue this week. Caroline Malone, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
We can now catch up with our correspondent Benji Hyer. Benji, what's the Washington reaction been to the Gaza ceasefire?
Well, we're expecting to hear, in fact, from President Joe Biden tonight. He makes his official farewell address to the nation, his last chance to try to shape his legacy before he steps out of office. And, of course, Donald Trump retakes the White House. And that speech, I presume, will now point a little bit more towards Joe Biden's foreign policy legacy, given that this deal has been agreed under his watch. But ultimately, it will also be all eyes on the president-elect. You spoke before about his post recently on Truth Social, where he praised his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who has been in meetings with his Israeli counterparts in the past couple of weeks. And I think there'll be a view within Washington that this is going to be seen favourably from Donald Trump's perspective, because ultimately, if this deal holds, if there is eventually peace in that region, he can try to take credit for that, given that his team was getting ready to take over as this deal was pushed through. But equally, if it collapses and the truce doesn't hold, he can ultimately point towards the Biden administration and brand this as a failure of a deal. But ultimately, there's also, relief. We're talking about a conflict here that has raged on for many, many months, that the Biden administration has tried tirelessly to end, and eventually it has managed to do that. And I'm sure there'll be sighs of relief within the White House, given that this is one of Joe Biden's last aims on his foreign policy agenda.
Benji, as you said there, Gaza's ceasefire deal has been reached between Hamas and Israel. We do know Joe Biden gives his farewell speech this evening. He's been in politics for a very long time. What can we expect from that this evening?
Well, it's not just a farewell address to end his presidency. This is also a farewell address to cap off almost a half century of political service for Joe Biden, a half century, a career in politics. And as I said before, sort of a last chance to try to communicate to the country and to shape his legacy before the historians take over and be the judge of his one-term presidency. I think he would like to be remembered as the man that tried to unite the country, who passed major pieces of legislation, who rescued the economy post-COVID-19, and who defeated Trump and rescued America from Donald Trump, not once but twice. But given what we've seen in the past couple of months with his heir, Vice President Kamala Harris, actually losing that election to the former president, that is not what Joe Biden may be remembered for. Effectively, he has become the bridge from Trump 1 to Trump 2. And with Donald Trump retaking the White House shortly, he will have the opportunity to reverse many of the achievements and accomplishments that we've seen under Joe Biden's administration. So I think that the sitting president, the outgoing president, will want to use this opportunity to make sure that the closing judgment on his political career is not just one of defeat and of reversal.
Benji, I just want to switch gears slightly here to cabinet nominees. We spoke to you yesterday during a Pete Hegseth hearing. Marco Rubio and Pam Bondi facing the grilling today. Remind us which cabinet positions they both nominated for and how they've come across during those hearings so far. There were a few protesters during them too.
That's right, they were, in the same way there was for the Defence Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth yesterday. But whilst he took much of the spotlight, this morning in Washington, we have had 6 hearings almost take place simultaneously, the most high profile of which was, as you mentioned, Pamela Bondi for Attorney General, who spoke about making America safe again and pledging that there will not be an enemies list, she says, within the Department of Justice, a reference there to the fears of retribution that could unfold under Donald Trump as he seeks to potentially weaponize the Department of Justice that has for many years investigated him. She wasn't the first preference, by the way, for the president-elect for this position. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz was his pick until he stepped out of the race amid various controversies and allegations of sexual misconduct. She has faced a great degree of scrutiny over her close connection to Donald Trump, the fact that she served as his lawyer, for example, during his impeachment proceedings and during that trial into his attempts to overturn the 2020 election results, which he lost. Then just down the hall, Marco Rubio, the senator who Donald Trump wants to be Secretary of State. He has used his opening remarks to emphasize the need to prioritize America in foreign policy, harking back to Donald Trump's famous phrase about America first and making America great again. On Ukraine, he says the official position would be for that war to end, and for that there need to be concessions on both sides, he says. And also he touched upon that ceasefire agreement, which has happened in the past couple of moments. He was met with protests, both in English and Spanish. What is interesting, I'll just add briefly about Marco Rubio, is, number one, his very hawkish policy positions on China, on Iran, for example, and on Cuba, a fierce critic of Cuba as a Cuban-American himself, and someone who therefore might choose to reverse the announcement that we saw from Joe Biden just yesterday to remove Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism under the United States. We actually saw that go the other way under Donald Trump, so a bit of a flip-flopping there. And what is also interesting about Marco Rubio, the other detail, is his change in terms of the relationship he's had with Donald Trump. This is someone who previously called the president-elect unfit for office, a con artist, accused him of having small hands, if you remember that, in 2016. And in response, Mr. Trump derided Marco Rubio on several occasions. They now find themselves allies, and one may be working for the other in a couple of weeks' time if Marco Rubio is approved by his colleagues in the Senate.
Benji, Hyer in Washington, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us US reaction to that Gaza ceasefire deal, which has been reached between Hamas and Israel. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The highest level of alert is back in parts of Los Angeles as the death toll from the wildfires rises to 25. The National Weather Service has issued red flag warnings as fire-wary residents brace for strong winds that are expected to exceed the 50 miles per hour limit. Such strong winds can lead to an uncontrollable spread of new fires, even as firefighters battle existing flames. Iran's Navy has unveiled its first signals intelligence ship. The Zagros is equipped with electronic sensors and the ability to intercept cyber operations and conduct intelligence monitoring. Iran has plans to raise its military budget by around 200%. It comes amid a time of high tensions with Israel and the US under incoming President Donald Trump. Now it's believed 78 bodies have been pulled out of an illegal gold mine in South Africa. Around 82 survivors have emerged, but hundreds remain trapped underground. The abandoned mine was illegally accessed and has been the scene of a tense standoff between the miners and the authorities. And health experts have said the term obesity needs a more accurate and nuanced definition as the demand for weight loss drugs soar. The Lancet journal has recommended doctors consider overall health rather than just a body mass index. The report suggests separating preclinical and clinical obesity in order to tackle the global issue and ensure optimal treatment options. To South Korea now, and Yoon Suk Yeol has become the country's first sitting president to be detained and sent to a detention center near Seoul in a massive law enforcement operation on Wednesday. The development marks the latest twist in a political crisis that was triggered by Yoon's failed attempt to impose martial law last month and which has shaken confidence in the democratic integrity of South Korea. Here's what Yoon had to say earlier.
Today, when I saw them break into the security area using firefighting equipment, I decided to respond to the Corruption Investigation Office's investigation, despite it being an illegal investigation to prevent unsavory bloodshed. However, that does not mean that I am acknowledging the investigation of the CIO. I couldn't help but feel it is deplorable to witness the way these truly illegal proceedings are being forcibly carried out with an invalid warrant.
In a video message, suspended President Yoon Suk Yeol said he decided to comply to avoid bloodshed, even though he didn't agree with the legal basis of the arrest warrant. He had been holed up for weeks in his residence with many of his supporters gathered outside. And this was the second attempt by authorities to try to arrest him amid a standoff with Yoon's security service. And this is a criminal investigation that centers on whether Yoon committed alleged insurrection for a failed martial law declaration on December 3rd. There were more than 1,000 officers involved in this operation, some reportedly using wire cutters to remove barbed wire placed by the Presidential Security Service. The Corruption Investigation Office said Yoon was brought into custody about 5 hours after investigators arrived at the compound. And Yoon is set to be held in a detention center near the CIO headquarters while he's being questioned. And the anti-corruption agency has 48 hours to request a court order to formally arrest him. And the leader of the opposition Democratic Party has called this arrest the first step in restoring order. Last month, Yoon declared martial law but was backed down after lawmakers voted it down. It plunged the country into a political crisis, and Yoon has had his presidential powers suspended when Parliament impeached him. On Thursday, we're also expecting the second session of the impeachment trial. The Constitutional Court has up to 6 months to decide whether to remove Yoon or reinstate him. Fresh elections must be held within 2 months if he's removed. He did not show up for the first hearing on Tuesday. It's unclear if he will show up on Thursday, but the court says in any case it will proceed without him.
Let's have a look at some other stories making headlines from around the world today. Striking a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine may take longer than incoming US President Donald Trump first envisioned. His advisors have said they are looking at a timeline of months, a stark contrast to Trump's promise to solve the war on day one of his first term in office. As the timeline extends, Russia continues to make significant battlefield gains. Australia has summoned the Russian ambassador after reports that a Melbourne man has been killed in Russian captivity. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is warning of strong action if Oscar Jenkins is harmed and has asked Russia about his well-being. Jenkins is a teacher who was serving alongside Ukraine's military before his capture as a prisoner of war. A record 36.8 million tourists flocked to Japan last year. A weak currency and government-backed promotions have contributed to the increase. The country has an ambitious target of nearly doubling those numbers to 60 million visitors per year by 2030. And a team of researchers from Penn State have issued a warning for pet owners who kiss their dogs. The study reveals the household animals are overlooked spreaders for zoonotic pathogens, which include antibiotic-resistant salmonella. The team have urged dog owners to avoid kissing their pets and stress the importance of washing their hands regularly after contact. Let's return to our top story, and a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. We can now speak to Professor Kamal Hawash, a Palestinian academic and an analyst. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate it. An official announcement could be made imminently from the Qatari Prime Minister. When are we expecting him to speak?
Well, we are told it's only a matter of hours before that happens. Clearly, even though we are told that a deal is reached, until somebody comes out and announces that it's been reached, we still await confirmation. So I think certainly Palestinians are looking forward to hearing that a deal has been reached, because their suffering has been indescribable, and we want to see the end of the daily killings by Israel.
Professor, you mentioned a deal there. As you said, no official announcement yet. It's what we're waiting for. But what is possibly in this deal?
Well, it will be that the Israeli troops begin to withdraw from the main population areas towards the east. They would leave the Netzarim corridor, which divides the north and south. We're not clear yet whether they would leave what's called the Philadelphia corridor completely, but all the indications are that that's going to happen. But that on the first day of this deal, that 3 Israeli hostages will be released, followed by another 4 at the end of the first week. And at the same time, you begin to see Palestinian prisoners released by Israel. And then things should continue beyond that there would be no further attacks by either side, if you like. And then they begin to move towards a second stage, where they begin to get much further in the release of most of the hostages, if not all of them, and that Israel would leave the Gaza Strip, then leading to a stage where the question of rebuilding for those particularly who will be moving back north to their, it's difficult to say to their homes because Israel has destroyed most of them, but to the areas where they used to live, so that they can begin to rebuild their lives. And also from the first day, it is suggested that there would be 600 or so trucks a day going in with aid to help the Palestinians who have suffered terribly at the hands of Israel, who has tried to starve them to death.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, rebuilding. What does the future look like now, after you said things have been extremely difficult, aid's been difficult to get in, people are starving to death? What's going to happen?
Well, if things go according to plan, then the Rafah crossing would be open. In the first phases, temporary homes, accommodation, and more tents would be sent in, together with relief, both medical relief and in terms of food and other needs. And during that period, and that is something we also need to consider, there would be a question of who rules Gaza after the guns have stopped. And that isn't clear as yet. But that is important before the question of rebuilding starts. But when you consider that tens of thousands of homes have been destroyed, most of the medical facilities, almost all the universities, many of the schools, it's a huge task. There's going going to cost billions, but it is badly needed if we can get to a semblance of normality for these people, and for them to focus on the positive things of going back to some normal life, while the undoubted hatred that they've developed towards their oppressor will take even longer to curtail, because those who, when you consider that over 20,000 children have been killed, that there are many, many orphans. These are not, those who remain will not quickly forget what's happened. So yes, it's important to have rebuilding, electricity supplies, water, and so on, and also the ability to move in and out of Gaza would be something that they would very much be looking forward to. After they displayed unbelievable resilience in remaining on the land, and even though Israel has moved them from north to south to east to west at its will, which is something that they're not going to forget in a hurry.
Professor, Netanyahu hasn't ruled out continued fighting after this first phase. What do you make of this? Is the ceasefire deal, or the deal we could reach, possibly fragile? How do we know that it's going to be stuck to and things are going to work in accordance?
Yeah, first of all, let's get to the deal. Let's get to a real ceasefire so people can have some relief. And then I think the various parties that have worked so hard, like Qatar and Egypt, and indeed the Americans, with a new administration coming in, Trump wants quiet. He wants an end to this. And I suggest that part of the reason why Israel eventually moved to get to this deal was the prospect of Trump coming in, and he promised, it'd be hellfire if the deal wasn't reached, and this means that both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side have got to move in a way that takes this out of the list of priorities that Trump has, because he has many. But any ceasefire is fragile. We've seen what happened in Lebanon, particularly in terms of Israel showing complete disregard for any agreements on the pretense that it's all to do with its security. But what we look forward to is, one, an end to this, the rebuilding, but then we need to move to a real effort to bring an end to this conflict that meets the rights of the Palestinian people. Because unless that happens, no amount of normalization, no amount of aggression by Israel against the Palestinians is going to bring peace to Israelis after 76, 77 years of the creation of their state. That's something they should think about. What is it that will bring them peace? And it's only when the Palestinian people attain their rights.
Professor, I wanted to talk to you about Donald Trump. You mentioned him there, and he's obviously incoming soon, and his special envoy to the Middle East has played a role in brokering this very deal that we're talking about. Do you think that Trump is responsible for this ceasefire coming over the line, if it does, possibly?
Well, I think the Americans, as I say, the Qataris, the Egyptians have been working really hard for months to try and bring this deal together. And indeed, President Biden, who outlined this, or he presented this as a deal back in May. So it's not just Trump, but I think the prospect of him coming, and that single phrase where he said, unless the hostages are released, there will be, all hell to pay, if you like, made focus people's minds. And it's always been the case that Israel had run out of targets, to be quite honest. So why continue killing and destroying? Even just before I came to talk to you, a Palestinian journalist has been killed within minutes of a ceasefire being announced. So I think that Trump's stature will have played a role. He sent his envoy to Israel and indeed to Qatar and so on, and he's insisting that this is taken off his desk as an issue that he has to deal with when he's got many other issues, including Russia and Ukraine, what's happened in Los Angeles, as well as other areas, the cost of living in the United States. He thinks about tariffs. He's got many issues that he wants to bring in very soon after his inauguration. So this will help make sure that this is taken off his desk. But at the same time, and this is really what I'm interested in, is it will bring relief to the Palestinian people in Gaza. But in addition to that, I still hope that the International Criminal Court will be bringing Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders in terms of the various, the warrants that have been issued, because there has to be accountability. It isn't just about ending this. And quite honestly, why isn't Israel paying back reparations for the destruction of Gaza as well? That is something that the world should not forget. It was Israel that destroyed Gaza, not the Palestinian people.
Trump has been on Truth Social. He said, with this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist haven. We will continue promoting peace through strength throughout the region as we build upon the momentum of this ceasefire to further expand the historic Abraham Accords. What is your thoughts on what we just heard from Donald Trump there?
Yes. I mean, notice that he didn't mention Israel's occupation of Palestine, which is the main cause of the continuing conflict. He's focused on the Abraham Accords. They want to bring Saudi Arabia into these. Saudi Arabia has insisted there must be a Palestinian state before it normalizes relations with Israel. So his focus should be on how to end the occupation, how to dismantle the illegal settlements, because they're the biggest impediment to peace, and that the Palestinians just need to get basic rights that every one of us wants to enjoy, of freedom, of justice, and of equality. Now, if his focus extends beyond supporting Israel in what it's trying to do now, which is to increase its presence in the West Bank, and to say to people like Smotrich, don't think about a greater Israel. Israel is basically historic Palestine, less the area that will be there for the Palestinian state to be created. And if the Israelis don't think that's enough, then they cannot look forward to a peaceful future while they occupy another people's lands in accordance with international law.
Professor Kamal Hyer, Palestinian academic, thank you so much for joining me this evening to speak to us about that breaking news.
Thank you.
A reminder of our top stories this evening. A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has been agreed with the return of all hostages. Trump's picks for Attorney General and Secretary of State face the U.S. Senate as Washington prepares security for next week's inauguration. And South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has been arrested and sent to a detention center near Seoul 6 weeks after attempting to impose martial law. And that's all from us on W News this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, a special interview with Binance CEO Richard Teng, followed by Riz Khan. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining me.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Rizkan Show for empowering conversation. Mr. Richard, how do you see Trump's presidency playing a role in the innovation of the crypto industry over the coming 4 years?
First of all, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Well, I think we are all positive with President Trump's administration, right? So if you look at it, he has appointed the AI and crypto czar, meaning that these are the two key areas. And if you think about it, these are the two key technologies that will be driving every economic subsector going forward, from real estate to media, entertainment, to supply chain financing, and financial services in general. And these are the two most important technology to drive cost efficiency and effectiveness. So we're very excited with his administration. He promised to appoint pro-crypto regulators that will formulate clarity and give clarity to this space, but also things like US strategic Bitcoin reserves. And those are things that we're all looking forward to. And US has an outsized influence globally. So with that positive narrative, I do think that many countries around the world will start firstly looking at strategic Bitcoin reserve as well. And then secondly, giving much more clarity in terms of regulations to regulate this space.
What would be different to Binance under Trump presidency? Are you planning to gain your full license in all the states anytime soon?
At Binance, there's nothing that's going to be different, right? We're focusing on building. Last year, we started the year reaching an important milestone of 250 million users globally, and that's huge. So we are looking forward to continue to serve our global users to the best of our ability to do so. We will continue to monitor the US market. At this point in time, we have no plans, but going forward, depending on how things evolve, we may reconsider that issue further down the road.
Regulation is a main topic in the crypto industry. How does Binance approach working with the regulators in the different markets?
That's one of my 3 commitments when I stepped into the role of CEO in November of 2023, right? My second commitment is to really work very closely with global regulators on this front, because the direction of travel is very clear. There's going to be much clearer regulations, much more compliance, which is why we invest very heavily in the compliance space, and we work very closely with global regulators and law enforcement agencies. Binance is the most regulated crypto exchange globally. We have 21 regulatory approval globally, the latest one being in Brazil. And last year in 2024 alone, we secured 7 new regulatory approval, including in Argentina, Brazil, Thailand, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Dubai, and that list goes on. And we look forward to work very closely with global regulators to formulate frameworks that on the one hand support the innovative part of crypto, and on the other hand manages the risk aspect of crypto.
In the MENA region, how do you assess the adoption of a crypto industry and what is missing? What are your views when it comes to Saudi and UAE?
If you look at it, Saudi is an extremely important market in the MENA region. But if you look at the development of crypto regulations, just that aspect alone, Bahrain and UAE are ahead of the curve. So that's only on the regulatory aspects, and we work very closely with regulators in Bahrain and UAE. We are regulated in both countries and jurisdiction across the different parts of UAE as well. We're looking forward to working very closely with regulators in Saudi, including SAMA, CMA on that front, as Saudi look to develop its own crypto regulatory framework to support this sector. As I mentioned, crypto together with AI are the 2 most important industry, and we look forward to really support everybody's journey on this. Crypto adoption in the MENA region is extremely high. In UAE alone, I believe is above 30% in terms of crypto adoption. Saudi has very, very high adoption as well. And we look forward to be in the Saudi market, working very closely with regulators to be regulated there, working very closely with the banks and payment service providers to really support our Saudi friends in terms of their crypto journey.
How do you view the rise of decentralized exchanges compared to centralized ones?
Do you see a future where DEXs become more dominant?
My view is this, right? So we are at a very early stage of crypto adoption. So we are between 7 and 8%. If you look at what happened to internet, for instance, and every technology, once you reach a critical adoption pace of about 7 to 8%, the next 10% will come through very quickly. So that means that both centralized exchange and decentralized exchange will continue to grow because the pie is growing, and we are very excited with that future. Will there come a time where decentralized exchange overtakes centralized exchange? It may happen. But as of now, centralized exchange offer many features that decentralized exchange are not able to offer, right? For example, proper customer service, people that you can contact. Regulators can work with centralized exchange to regulate them, make sure there's proper KYB, KYC, customer onboarding, transaction monitoring. And those are things that they can't do with decentralized exchange, right? So with more activities moving there, I do think regulators will start to focus their attention on decentralized exchange part of it. Will it overtake? Over the very, very long term, it might happen when you have much more crypto native being in the industry. But as of now, I think centralized exchange will still play a critical part in most people's crypto journey.
What upcoming projects or technological advancements is Binance focusing on?
We are agnostic, and what we want to do, we are the largest crypto ecosystem. What we wish to do at this very early stage of crypto adoption is to really support the different areas of innovation, right? So be it in terms of things like stable coins, in terms of payment space, utility, the infrastructure layer, DeFi, GameFi, you have things like AI agent, etc., etc., and the list goes on, right? And all these are innovation. The way for crypto to continue to develop and be sustainable are firstly much clearer regulations, much better user interface and product features, but also more importantly, having more innovation and more utility, more use cases. And that will continue to support the crypto narrative and adoption globally.
How important are the partnerships and collaborations to Binance's growth strategy? Can you share any excitement partnership that Binance is working on?
It's very important. So it's one of my 3 commitments. It's my 3rd commitment. The reason why partnership is important is, again, we are at a very early stage of crypto adoption. So we want to make sure that we support different forms of innovation. And we can't do it alone. We can only do it through partnerships. As more and more people come together and rethink the future of the world, be it in terms of financial services, in terms of payments, in terms of entertainment, in terms of DeFi, etc., the better we will be. So all these are achieved through partnership. We just announced an important partnership with USDC, with Circle, in terms of supporting stablecoin, which is an extremely important use case and utility within the crypto world. So globally, in different regions around the world, we have different forms of partnership, and we will continue to work very closely with our global as well as regional and local partners to support crypto adoption.
Is there anything you would like to say to Binance users or the broader crypto community watching this interview today?
We are very grateful. We have achieved a key milestone of 250 million users in 2025. Last year, we onboarded 70 million new users alone. So if you think about it, close to 30% of users are new users on the platform. We're extremely, extremely grateful for all your support, trust, and confidence, something that we hold very dear. And we continue to build the best-in-class platform with the best features out there to really support everybody in their crypto journey. We are still early, keep building, the future is bright.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. So how has 2025 begun for you? Are you still feeling optimistic about the year ahead? Are your New Year's resolutions standing firm, or have they already broken on the rocks of reality? Well, don't worry, things could be worse. And in this episode, we'll tell you how. As Donald Trump lays out his vision for changing the global map, we'll take a look at the prospects for the world in 2025. Later, we'll sit down with Pascal Lamy, who ran the World Trade Organization for almost a decade and now dedicates himself to promoting a peaceful world. But we start with Ian Bremmer, whose Eurasia Group produces an annual countdown for the top risks facing our planet. It's keenly anticipated by governments and strategists alike. Ian, thank you very much for joining the show. Now, last year, around this time, we had a wonderful conversation about your global risk predictions for 2024 in what you described as the Voldemort of years, the year that should not be mentioned because of all the terrible things that would happen. Looking back on it, I know a lot changes during the year and a lot of unexpected things happen, but how did your predictions compare with what actually happened in 2024?
We always keep our risks report up on our homepage all year long. And then we go back at the end of the year and want to see if we, call balls and strikes and see what we can learn. I would say that the top risks all came out pretty much exactly as we expected. I mean, we said very unpopularly, we said Ukraine was likely to be partitioned, heading towards that. That seems almost certain at this point. It's not what we want to see, but it's certainly where we think it's going. We thought the Middle East war was going to expand dramatically from where it was back in January. That's obviously played out over the course of the year, not just in Gaza, but also much more broadly in Lebanon and with the Houthis and the rest. And we thought this was going to be an incredibly divisive time inside the United States, the U.S. versus itself. And of course, we were this close to the U.S. president-elect being assassinated in the United States, and the level, the animus within the U.S. Politically, as the U.S. system is in many ways in crisis, has played out. I think the big thing that we were surprised by was just how much worse the Chinese economy turned out than we expected. We knew it was doing badly, but it's been a much deeper challenge. And that has meant, for example, we thought in 2024 that there was going to be a much bigger fight over critical minerals and supply chain, because the world is moving away from a free market towards more industrial policy. But you don't fight as much over critical minerals if nobody wants to buy them. And the fact is that Chinese consumer demand fell off a cliff. So, I mean, that as a risk, frankly, I think is a longer term concern. But looking in my rearview mirror, I wouldn't have put that in the list for 2024. And I would have put the China risk up a couple ticks from where it was in the report back last year. Also, I was particularly pleased that we listed U.S.-China relations as a herring. This was a relationship. You had, the balloon getting, knocked out of the sky, and you had Nancy Pelosi traveling to Taiwan. But actually, the last year of U.S.-China relations were far better managed by both the Americans and the Chinese, with 25 high-level channels of dialogue established between the two, kind of recreating the old strategic and economic dialogue, and even military channels. So no trust was built, but a level of stabilization in the relationship did play out over 2024, notwithstanding the fact that the U.S. didn't give away the store to the Chinese in any way. So it was one of Biden's few foreign policies that generally he got good marks from both Democrats and Republicans, Riz.
Well, Ian, one thing that struck me very much in 2024 is everyone talking about the divisions within the US, and that risk you had, the US versus itself, really stuck with me. I remember we talked about it. Did the election being so decisive in favor of Donald Trump really mitigate that risk?
I think it helped. I mean, it's so decisive is an overstatement. Trump did not get 50% of the popular vote. He got slightly less. So, that is not a country where the voters are telling you we all want Trump. That's not what America was saying. In fact, I mean, if you looked at elections all over the world, incumbents got hit everywhere. Kamala Harris actually performed better than most incumbents did. I mean, if you were an alien looking down on the world, you would have asked, why did Harris perform so well compared to all of these other incumbents? And it doesn't matter to Americans, obviously, given the outcome. And the answer, I think, is largely, number one, because the U.S. economy was performing so much better than so many of those other economies coming out of the pandemic. And also because Trump was such a divisive character inside the United States. And you had people even going for third parties, which is very unusual in the U.S. I think the RFK endorsement meant a lot. In fact, I would say that RFK probably mattered more for Trump's election than Elon did, despite his $250 million, which, ain't nothing at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, I think looking ahead to 2025, Riz, one thing that is really interesting is that these three big wars, Russia, Ukraine, Middle East, and the U.S. versus the U.S., are all sort of ebbing, right? I mean, it's not like the Israelis have much else to hit in Gaza. And, we've got a ceasefire with Hezbollah that may not hold, but I'd be surprised if the war breaks out the way it did in the early days in the fall. Russia, Ukraine, I think there's a decent chance we get a ceasefire over the course of 2025, even though it's probably going to take a little longer than the 24 hours that Trump promised in his campaign. And the United States versus itself, well, even though it was a very close election, Americans do not believe it was rigged. They say it was free, it was fair, and Trump is their president. They may not like it, but he won. And so, I mean, his win was actually perceived as more legitimate than, frankly, by the Americans as a whole, than either Biden's or Trump's in the last two cycles. So, I mean, there are a lot of things to worry about in 2025, but the risks that were front and center for everyone in 2024 have actually receded.
Well, you gave me the considerations you'd put forward in looking at your 2025 risk. Let's go through the countdown, because that's always the fascinating part, starting with number 10. Which you describe as Mexican standoff. It seems that the US's neighbor is going to have a painful time in 2025.
Yeah, it's going to be tougher. I mean, look, the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who is quite impressive in my view, she really doesn't want a fight with the United States. And she is looking to do things that will make Trump feel like he's getting a deal. In other words, she's going to try to appease him. Right? I mean, I said this is about as dangerous as we've had a world since the 30s, and appeasement is the word of the day in how to respond to Trump for countries around the world. I've already seen this. I was in Mexico a few weeks ago, and they're trying to figure out how to hit the Chinese so they can take Chinese goods off the Mexican market and not have them pass through to the United States. They want to give that to Trump. They recognize they need to do more on fentanyl. They need to do more on their own southern border so fewer illegal immigrants come through Mexico to the U.S. They're prepared to do that. But AMLO had a pretty good relationship with Trump. He was on the left, but he was a populist. He was the same generation, kind of gruff but engaging and charismatic. They liked each other. Sheinbaum is a PhD environmental scientist who graduated from Berkeley. And she's a woman. I mean, it would be hard for you and I to find a demographic that Trump is likely to consider more problematic than her. So they're not going to get on personally well. And there are a lot of demands being made by the U.S. The trade deficit is a lot greater this time around. The China issue is pretty serious and hard to resolve. And the U.S. is in a stronger position. So, and also interesting, the USMCA, which needs to be renegotiated, the Canadians coming in, the likely new conservative Canadian government, would be very happy to negotiate bilaterally with the U.S. and throw Mexico under a bus. So, look, I think Mexico-U.S. relations will eventually get to the right place, and they will figure this out. But 2025 is going to be choppier between these two than a lot of people are expecting.
Now, number 9 is an intriguing one. Ungoverned spaces. What does that really encompass?
Well, in what we call a G0 world, the law of the jungle, where you are moving away from international rule of law and common values and standards, you end up with a lot of places that people forget about that aren't really governed. You know, like Sudan, where 25 million people are living under humanitarian crisis, and over 8 million have been displaced. Like Yemen, like Libya, like Gaza, of course, and the West Bank, like big swaths of Ukraine that have been destroyed and mined, but a lot of Ukrainians and Russians are still living there. Like Haiti, right next to the United States, that no one is really doing anything about. The Kenyans sent a few hundred peacekeeping troops, but the gangs have taken over, basically. Myanmar, with a big fight between a lot of ethnic minorities and a military junta that the Chinese are very uncomfortable about, but no one's able to stop the fighting. So what we're seeing is larger and larger numbers of people around the world that are living in functionally ungoverned spaces. And that is, it's not one of the top risks in the world because, you know, frankly, these places don't have a lot of economic importance and aren't critical for national security, but of the big powers. But they matter, and they're starting to matter more. There's also ungoverned spaces that aren't about individual countries, but are instead about, you know, outer space and everyone launching satellites, but not having agreements about the rules of the road there, or under seas, and, you know, all of these pipelines and fiber cables that are getting damaged by rogue actors, some of whom are states, some of whom are non-state actors. So, you know, as you see a breakdown of global governance, you see implications for public goods, both for individual human beings and for society as a whole.
Now, with artificial intelligence, I guess that was inevitable, going to be somewhere on the list. You've put number 8 as AI unbound, which makes it sound a little terrifying.
I'm a big enthusiast about AI. I think it's incredible, the use cases that we're seeing growing every day for expanding human capital and also for improving industrial innovation in every sector in every country. So I think it's still undersold from that perspective, despite, you know, a lot of hype and a lot of froth. But I also know it's undergoverned. And this year, last year, there was a lot of focus on we need to prioritize this governance. The Brits, you know, put their flag down and said we want to have an AI safety summit every year, and that's how we're going to make a difference. This year, they've rebranded it. It's now being called an AI action summit. That tells you a lot. The Europeans as a whole feel like they focus too much on regulation. They're being left behind in the AI race, and they want to spend more. They want to engage more, innovate more. The Americans, Trump is probably going to rip up the executive order on AI that Biden did with the 7 systemically important AI companies in the U.S. And the U.S.-China dialogue on AI, which was hard to get started and only in its infancy, is likely not to go forward in the Trump administration and its relationship with Xi Jinping. So you're going to end up with an AI arms race between the Americans and the Chinese, which will remind you of what we had with the Soviets before the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it's a lot faster moving. And you'll also have a lot of tinkerers and bad actors that will download their American or European chatbots, and they'll customize them without the safety regs that they have. We've already started playing with these internally for analysis. And, you know, we're seeing it's very easy to ask an AI bot today, how do you kill somebody with arsenic? It's very easy to figure out how one would go about assassinating a CEO. We're not trying to do that, but there are people out there that are. And clearly, we're not going to have any governance until the crisis comes. And that's where we are on AI right now.
That's a terrifying thought, actually, where it could go. Now, with number 7, you have an interesting term, beggar thy world. What did that mean?
Beggar thy world means that with the Americans who are looking to put tariffs on other countries and looking to force other countries to decouple their national security-related economic investments from China, but the Chinese have an economy that is faring badly, and that the only part that's really producing is a significant export manufacturing sector, everybody in between gets squeezed. We're living in a world where everybody wants to do open business with the Americans and the Chinese, And that's becoming much harder as the Chinese and Americans export very different political and economic strategies that are exclusive. They're mutually exclusive. So it means that other countries are going to have a harder time, and they're going to have a harder time with economies that have not fully recovered from the pandemic, with higher interest rates and higher debt levels. We've already seen in Brazil, if you make a little mistake on your fiscal environment, your markets will take a hit, your currency will take a hit. The UK is suffering for this right now. The French government is suffering for this. The Canadian government fell because of this. It wasn't because of Trump. It was actually the fiscal crisis. And then Chrystia Freeland, the deputy prime minister, basically shooting Trudeau in the face. That is a challenge that lots of developing countries and advanced industrial economies are going to be facing that pressure in 2025.
Now, you've got Iran in there as number 6, Iran on the ropes. You see it as having weakened quite a lot over the past year, don't you?
I think I'm hard-pressed to find a large country that has weakened more than Iran has. They've lost their empire. The axis of resistance has been basically destroyed by Israel with American help, and Assad by HTS with Turkish help. And so, I mean, that was the way they projected power. As someone who studied the Soviet Union in the late 80s through its collapse in 91, Iran to me right now seems to be right about 1989, when the Soviets lost the Eastern Bloc and they no longer had a credible story internally, economically, politically, or geopolitically for their own people. That's where Iran is right now. They have an 85-year-old supreme leader who is in bad health and hasn't declared a direct successor yet. There's going to be competition there. Certainly, the Iranians know how to repress their people, and I expect that they will continue to as their problems. But, the Americans and the Israelis sense this weakness and may well be willing to help them along. I expect a maximum policy of pressure economically from Trump, and I expect espionage and sabotage and assassinations, attacks on critical infrastructure from Israel. And maybe the U.S. and Israel would even consider jointly attacking Iran's nuclear capabilities. So I don't think this is a 1991 moment. I'd be surprised if Iran fell the Islamic Republic in 2025. But I do think that Iran has become the largest risk in the Middle East this year going forward, which it certainly was not last year.
Well, Ian, with Iran, with its back against the wall and in such a difficult situation, what risk is there that it's an even bigger threat because it has nothing to lose?
I think the risk has been that they could mistakenly over-respond to a significant threat. Now, they haven't done that heretofore, Riz. As you know, the Israelis assassinated the political leader of Hamas in Tehran on the date of the Iranian president's inauguration. And one can imagine, if the United States, Trump's elected, he invites Netanyahu to come to his inauguration in Blair House, and the Iranians assassinate him on January 20th, I think the Americans would respond immediately. And Iran didn't. They didn't. They showed incredible restraint. And they showed restraint when they were taking direct missile hits from the Israelis. So, actually, I take your point, Riz, and certainly there are those that recognize that they're in trouble because they look so weak, that their deterrence is no longer effective. But the fact is, there's very little that they can do to effectively threaten Israel and the United States in this environment. They don't have their Axis proxies to do the dirty work for them. They can't even get weapons to Hezbollah anymore because Syria, which was where they were transiting, is gone for them. Israeli air defense is pretty impressive. It's not like Iran is just next door. It's unclear to me what they would do if they had that strategy.
Now, I'm guessing that Vladimir Putin was among those who would not have expected the situation with Ukraine to be going on for so long. We're into 2025 already. And you have number 5 as Russia still rogue. Take us through that.
Well, Russia was number 3 last year. So, the reality is that the Russia risk has gone down somewhat. I do think that the next few months are critical because as we get closer to negotiations, Russia and Ukraine will look to improve their position. And that, it's why Ukraine has now just opened a new offensive inside Kursk in Russia, in Russian territory. We just saw, I think it was 15 Ukrainians killed in Zaporizhia by Russian missile attacks, the largest number of deaths we've had in quite some time in Ukraine from such an attack. Civilians, we're going to see a lot more of that going forward. So that's dangerous. I do believe that, and I mentioned earlier, that a ceasefire is likely to be brokered by the Americans with some support from allies, including Emmanuel Macron. And I think when the new German government comes in, by the way, assuming Friedrich Merz is the chancellor, which is our expectation, that they will be very aligned with Trump and with Macron on this. But even if you get a ceasefire, that is not going to be a breakthrough settlement. And that's the beginning of negotiations, a ceasefire. And that means that sanctions are still on, Russian sovereign assets are still frozen, and there's going to be a lot of conflict between Russia and frontline NATO states. You saw them intervening in the Romanian election. You've seen them pay for acts of arson and vandalism and even attempted assassinations in countries in NATO, in Poland, the Baltics, the Nordics, and the rest. I expect that's going to continue. So I still think that a rogue Russia, in alliance with North Korea, with some 10,000 troops on the ground fighting for them and dying for them, I think that this is a pretty dangerous environment.
Now, about 3 decades or so ago, the world got the word Reaganomics when Ronald Reagan was the US president. And you have at number 4, Trumponomics. So take us through that. That's going to be an interesting one this year, isn't it?
Yes, and Trumponomics is really about a Trump administration that is going to implement a lot of what they said they are going to implement. He is in a much stronger position. The Republicans, the GOP, are riding his coattails, not the other way around. He has appointed loyalists inside his administration, not like Republicans who are more loyal to the party. His first time around, you don't have people like Mattis and Gary Cohn and Pompeo and Nikki Haley. That's not this group. And that means if he wants to put tariffs in, he's going to put tariffs in. And I think that, there's a Washington Post leak the other day that said, he's going to back off. He immediately posted and said, that's fake news, and I'm setting my tariffs up. We're going to have 100 executive orders to begin with. That's going to have economic implications for the world. That's going to be inflationary. He says he's going to get rid of a bunch of illegal immigrants. I expect him to deport 1 million people in his first year. It's not 15 to 20 million, but there are going to be labor costs for that. These people are, not only do they work at very cheap rates, but they consume in the United States, and they're taxpayers. Medicare, Social Security, local taxes, that money is going to be gone. And that will also be inflationary. It'll have an impact on growth. Now, there are things that Trump will do that will make the markets happy. So he'll roll back regulations, and he'll extend the 2017 tax cuts on corporates and on high net worth individuals. But I think most of that low-hanging fruit was already picked in his first term. And I also think the macroeconomic indicators are more challenging this time around. The multiples that corporate stocks are trading at of earnings are a lot higher than they were before, less sustainable. You've got, higher interest rates. You've got more challenging debt levels. I just think it is going to be harder for Trump to get the juice in the markets and the growth from this type of politics that he had last time around. So Trumponomics strikes us as a pretty significant risk.
I wonder, Ian, how surprised you were when you heard recent announcements by Donald Trump talking about claims on Greenland, the Panama Canal, that Canada should be part of the USA and so on. These seem to a lot of people to be quite out there.
Yeah, he talked about the 51st state. He talked about that when he met with the Canadians in his first term. Didn't make as much news then. He's getting more play out of it now. He clearly is leaning into the more extravagant claims on these other countries. When you hear him talk about the Panama Canal and Greenland, he sounds a lot like Putin sounded talking about Ukraine in 2022, justifications for the attacks on Crimea in 2014. the referendum and the illegal annexation. So, I mean, not a great thing, but also, we've seen this. When Trump was president first time around, he promised the one thing he said all the time: we're going to build a wall, Mexico's going to pay for it. No one believed that. And Mexico did not pay for a wall. But Mexico did increase security on their own southern border that led to fewer Mexicans and fewer Venezuelans and others coming into the United States. And that was a win for Trump. So what Trump is doing is he's making these crazy demands and he expects to be appeased. And he's going to be appeased by the Canadians and the Panamanians. And they're not going to give him land, but they're going to do things that are going to make him happier, that he can say, see, I got this done and Biden couldn't because I'm stronger. So I'm not surprised at all. I think we're going to see a lot more of it, and it's part of the playbook.
And as you mentioned, Russia was in number 3 spot last year. This time it's US-China breakdown. So what are your expectations? Because there's been a lot of rhetoric around the US-China relationship.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is possible that we could see a breakthrough deal between Trump and China. He reached out to Xi Jinping and invited him to his inauguration. No American president's ever done that before. Elon Musk is the most powerful person around the administration. And he says, as you know, he says, has all sorts of horrible things to say about the British government, the German government, the French government. He's never said a bad word about Xi Jinping or about the Chinese dictatorship. So there are people that would like to do a deal. But I don't think the preconditions for a deal are there. I think that American demands around China on technology and on the trade deficit and on Chinese pass-through trade through Mexico, Vietnam, India, into the United States, you're going to see enormous pressure from the U.S. I think you're going to see higher tariffs from the U.S. on China in early weeks in the Trump administration. And I think what the Chinese are willing to do in return is just not enough to get to a deal. They'll buy some soybeans. They'll buy some Boeing planes if Boeing's actually making any. But, I don't think that they're going to get to yes. And absent that, you're going to be moving towards a trade war between the two largest economies in the world. So, that's not a Cold War yet. And it's certainly not a hot war. It's not a fight over Taiwan. But given how big these economies are, that got to number 3 on our list.
Well, at number 2, you have Donald Trump again from Trumponomics earlier on. You've now got the rule of Don. And I wonder where that will fit into 2025.
Yeah. And again, the rule of Don, we're talking about a president that has so much more power in the United States and internationally, and other countries and companies are going to have to respond. Look, we put this report out on January 6th. And I mean, literally within a couple of days of it coming out, we already saw this risk play with Mark Zuckerberg and Meta completely changing their business model to align with Elon and Trump. Now it's community notes and no more moderators and censorship. And instead it's all free speech. And he put a few posts out explaining why he was doing it. And at no point in the post did he say that this is the new model and we should be doing this. Why not just say, I'm doing it because Trump just won and I don't have a choice. It's the rule of Don. I mean, in the law of the jungle, it's a very dangerous place for a lot of people, but it's great to be apex predator. And the rule of Don is what happens to all sorts of other people that need to align with that. And it's a pretty big deal. I mean, you now have Elon Musk, is the most powerful member of the private sector in the world, and he paid $250 million for the privilege. He's now regularly on phone calls and in meetings with Trump and foreign leaders and CEOs. Now, I mean, if I looked at Modi and he brought Gautam Adani on a call like that, a meeting like that, we'd be saying, oh my God, this is a banana republic. What are they doing? And yet it's the most powerful country in the world. You can't call the most powerful country in the world a banana republic. What do? You appease it. You get in line. You spend some money on it. You get on to get along. And that is what this means. And especially because Trump was almost assassinated and he believes that his political enemies and the so-called deep state were responsible for putting him in danger. They want to send him in jail. They impeached him twice. He asked for more Secret Service support after they're calling him Hitler and a fascist. They refused. I mean, it's clear that he's going to use the FBI and other agencies to address that. And, you know, if you're an American and you think that this is a guy that could investigate me and my family, you're going to start behaving differently. So I mean, that's why this is risk number two. And I mean, you know, if you can get Zuckerberg to jump on a dime within a couple of days, there are a lot of people around the world that are a lot weaker positioned than he that are going to do the same.
But Ian, isn't the USA meant to be set up by the founding fathers as having different branches of government that basically provide checks and balances that stop this kind of almost dictatorial power coming into play?
Well, it's not dictatorial power because there are checks and balances. The U.S. is not about to become a dictatorship. In fact, I don't think the U.S. is even on a pathway to becoming Hungary in the near term. And the reason for that is because there's still a professional military. There's still an independent judiciary, no matter who appoints them. And it's still a federal system. Whereas elections in the U.S. are actually run by states. They're not run by the federal government. So Trump doesn't have ability to steal them. And so there are significant limits on what he can do. But, you know, he can absolutely use his power and Elon's money to make life very uncomfortable for folks that don't say how high when he says jump. And that is just as true for Mark Zuckerberg as it is for the Prime Minister of Denmark. So, you know, that's what we're seeing playing out around the world today.
I guess what we're seeing here is the risk of the powerful influence rather than the direct executive power.
That's exactly right.
Well, number one on your list here, Ian, this year is G0. And you wrote G0 wins. So what do you see happening there? I know you've talked about the law of the jungle having come into play.
Yeah, a G0 world is very different from the American-led order that many have discussed over the past decades. I mean, if I think about what the U.S. in principle has stood for since 1989 when the wall came down, it was collective security, it was free trade, an architecture that supports it, and it was the promotion of democracy around the world. Now, the U.S. did not do that always consistently. It was frequently hypocritical. A lot of people criticized it. I'm not here to say that America's always right all the time. But that was the model that the United States was attempting to promote. And not only attempting to promote it, Riz, but was telling the Chinese, you need to accept that model for yourself. You're becoming more powerful. We're letting you into the global economy. We're letting you into the WTO, but you're going to have to become more of a democracy. You're going to have to accept rule of law. You're going to have to accept the free market and become responsible stakeholders in U.S.-led multilateral architecture. And not only did China not do that, but it turns out that the United States is actively renouncing that order. It's the first time I've ever seen where a country that creates an order in its image decides that it's no longer interested in that order. And instead, the U.S. is actually taking on a worldview which is much more Chinese. It's much more transactional. It's much more about power. It's not about rule of law. Trump will do a deal with anyone. It can be a dictator. It can be right wing, left wing. It can be a Democrat. He's the guy that sat down with Kim Jong-un. It doesn't matter. But he's going to use his power to get a deal that he wants and that works for the United States. So, as I said, the law of the jungle, the powerful do what they will, and the weak do what they must. That was originally Thucydides. When we had a much less developed geopolitical environment, but it applies increasingly in 2025. And it's a very dangerous place to be if you're not the one that's throwing the punches. So everyone else is playing defense geopolitically, right? I mean, the adversaries of the U.S. are in a weaker position. China's economically, at least for now, but Russia in structural decline, Iran in real trouble, but also the allies. You look at South Korea, Japan, Germany, France, the UK, Canada. These are all countries that are not only in a weak position from a military perspective, from an economic perspective, from a technological perspective, but also their governments are quite weak. So, I mean, Trump's going to get a lot of wins in the early days. He's going to break a lot of furniture.
Well, Ian, it's a great list, and I'm wondering, as we wrap up, what about the red herrings and things that almost made the list, some that didn't, obviously? What you were also looking at over 2025's prospects?
We had a few. One was, despite the fact that the United States is less interested in leaning into climate change and responses to it, we don't think that the global energy transition is going to stall. The Chinese are actually the global leaders right now in transition energy, kind of like the way the U.S. is on AI. And they see that as a huge advantage. They're going to throw an enormous amount of money at it. The Europeans are continuing. India, other countries in the developing world see that they need to for their own benefits. And even in the United States, Texas is the leader in producing renewable energy in the country. Red state Texas has overtaken California in the last couple of years. And so, big pieces of the Biden's Inflation Reduction Act will stay in place to help the energy transition because it's red state jobs. So we don't think that's going to go away. Europe is not going to fall apart as much as Trump might like it to. They've got a strong NATO Secretary General. They've got a strong EU leadership with von der Leyen, with Roberta Metsola, with Kaja Kallas. Macron remains strong on foreign policy, even though his domestic policy has imploded until at least 2026, when he has to look ahead to his own elections, which are in 27. And Germany, you're leaving a weak chancellor, and instead Friedrich Merz comes in, and he's much more aligned. So we actually think that the EU is going to stay together pretty well, despite all of the anti-establishment, Eurosceptic, and populist winds for change that are coming at the grassroots. And then finally, for all of those people in the U.S. and around the world that think that Trump is incompetent, it's going to fail, we don't. We think that a lot of Trump's efforts, a lot of what Trump's promised to do in his campaign, he's actually going to get done, and he's going to have a lot of wins. He had a lot of wins in his first term. He had USMCA, he had the Abraham Accords. People said he never would have accomplished those things. He's going to have a lot of wins in the first year of his administration as well. Those are our red herrings.
Ian, always a real pleasure to speak with you and to pick your brains. Thanks for your insight on what may turn out in 2025.
Riz Khan, great to talk to you, man.
Well, if that list of global risks facing the world has made you want to head back to bed and forget about 2025, let's hear a different perspective from a man who's determined to take on some of those challenges. The former head of the World Trade Organization, Pascal Lamy, refuses to abandon hope. As vice president of the Paris Peace Forum, he's a prominent voice among those promoting a more positive global solution. Pascal Lamy, thank you for the time.
My pleasure.
Let's start with your work with the Paris Peace Forum and look at the challenges, which are quite daunting, from climate change, terrorism, migration, and of course now the challenge of cybersecurity. Where do you start?
Well, what we're trying to do with the Paris Peace Forum, which we created with the French president in 2018, 6 years ago, is to adjust the way we handle international issues to the new realities. To put it very simply, in the old world, states, sovereigns were interacting, treaties, institutions, but they had a sort of monopoly of international relations. This system is not anymore fit for purpose, A, because the capacity to agree is much lower than it used to be because of geopolitical tensions, B, because most of the topics of today, take climate, take cybersecurity, take digital, take drug, take crime, are not just in the hands of sovereigns. Many other stakeholders, large multinationals, NGOs, cities, have an international cooperation capacity, which sometimes is higher than states. So if you want to get things done, you have to try and bring these people to the table with sort of purpose-led coalitions, which may not last 10 or 20 years, but which are better at getting things done.
You used a key word, capacity. From where will the resources come to even start to tackle these?
The good thing about what I call polylateralism as opposed to multilateralism, poly meaning with various actors, is that they bring their own resources. Companies, NGOs, philanthropy have resources which sometimes many states, including the poorer ones, do not have. So they bring resources, they bring expertise, and they bring energy. Their culture is much more often, let's sit around the table, we have a problem, let's try and find a solution together. And the Paris Peace Forum is a sort of incubator of these new coalitions. And incubating is a know-how which we've built and which, not always, but in many cases gives good results on the ground, which we can show do impact the way climate, digitalization, children on internet, or protection of the Southern Ocean can work.
Well, when you were heading the World Trade Organization, WTO, it seemed the world was globalizing. And I wonder to what degree is the promise of a collaborative and increasingly integrated world collapsing into a deglobalization now?
I would not agree with the fact that we've shifted from globalization to deglobalization. I don't think that's the case. We've shifted to a pattern of globalization, to another pattern of globalization, which is different. But if you look, for instance, at the main indicator of globalization, which is the volumes of world trade, they're still growing. So globalization, notably thanks to digital technologies, data transfers, is progressing, but it doesn't happen the same way as before. More regional action, Southeast Asia, the northern continent, Europe and Africa, and of course geopolitical tensions that in some cases are trumping the force of geoeconomics, such as, for instance, more protectionist policies in some sector or by some countries.
That's what I mean. You know, if there is increased trade, it doesn't necessarily happen at a global level. It could be more blocks and more regionalized.
Yes, and that's probably the case for some specific value chain. Okay. If you take the automotive sector, for instance, but it's not going to be the case for shirts or for wheat or for planes. If you look at the composition of international exchange, a lot of that remains really globalized, and many major international companies have a footprint on many continents.
Mr. Lamy, to what degree did COVID play a part in revealing, perhaps, maybe increasing, cracks in the system? What did we learn from that when it came to globalized integrity?
Well, I mean, in many ways, COVID was a big test and a big example of globalization. This pandemic, which in Greek means global, was worldwide. Now, the way we have reacted to that, yes, created differences, and at the time, we tried very much, including at the Paris Peace Forum, for instance, to avoid this turning into a new North-South divide. And the reality, retrospectively, is that industrialized countries did not do what they should have done in a globalized world, hence increasing this North-South fracture, which is there on climate, and which will probably be there on digital and cyber if we don't care enough about bridging these divides.
Now, one thing the Paris Peace Forum recognizes is that the world is turning inward. What do you think is a key reason for that?
Well, I think you're right. I've been involved in this international life for the last 35 or 40 years of my life. I've never seen a world in such a bad shape. I've never seen the world in such a mess. And if you look at numbers, the number of armed conflicts, which is one indicator is the highest since 1945. So this is a reality. We are in a world where geopolitical tension, sovereignty rivalries, starting with US-China, which is the big frame of all this, is moving ahead, and this is bad for development. This is bad for poverty reduction. This is bad for human condition overall. And those of us, like me, who are a bit of old monkeys, have to try and bring a bit of our experience, I would not dare say wisdom, to move the things in a better direction.
What do you think is fueling the populism that is effectively undermining institutions and the well-established mechanisms that were providing at least some collaboration?
I think what's feeding populism is that our economic, social and political systems do not deliver what a large part of our population want. And it's all true that populist parties, populist movements, have been better than others at capturing new trends such as identity politics, negative reactions vis-à-vis migrants. The use of social networks has created clans and polarization. All these elements are together, and I think those of us who are not on that side of politics have to be better at understanding, innovating, and thinking ahead.
That leads me to ask, how has the growth of fake news and now the very convincing deep fake complicated your mission?
Undoubtedly, the proliferation of social networks and of internet has opened a space for negative grouping, for people who feel the same way to coalesce. Some say that's what happened when we started writing. This what happened when we started printing. It may take a few decades before the system adjusts, but clearly for the moment we are not where we should be, and I personally believe that, for instance, total anonymity on social networks is a recipe for trouble.
And even worse, in the days of printing, it still took time to distribute. Now it's all instant and it's global.
Absolutely.
I find the term that the Paris Peace Forum quotes, that peace is not just the suspension of war, is an interesting one at this particular time when we have two major global conflicts. We have the Russia-Ukraine axis, the Israel-Gaza, even wider axis now. What real danger do you believe they pose to the overall world order and stability?
I think, in a way, the conflicts you mentioned are classical power rivalries, like the one we had in the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, the fact that the world, at least for us Europeans, is back to where we were 70 years ago. I mean, Russia invading Ukraine is like Germany invading Poland. It's exactly the same thing. And for roughly the same reasons, something is happening in your neighbor which you want to control, and you send troops. So this is a sort of regression that does not fit with the world of today. And these new power rivalries make it more complex to address the real problems of today, which are not whether I should invade my neighbor or not, but whether we can address climate change, whether we can run a cyber security system, whether we can fight against pandemics, and whether we can educate people. This is the real thing, and this is why at the Paris Peace Forum we try to work on the roots of peace or war, which lie in human systems.
Has it surprised you to see how these conflicts have created a massive disruption in the global supply chains? We've got now flights being cancelled, we see ships stranded, we see a lot of a standstill on the world trade level.
This is absolutely correct, and it shows that how whatever digitalization we are moving towards, and there's a lot of that, we still have physical infrastructure, seas, canals, ports, satellites, submarine cables, which are the infrastructures of the world of today and of tomorrow. There still is a physical routing of all this, which is prone to damage, war, and warfare.
Let me wrap up with a brief thought. Do you remain, with all this experience you have and wisdom, whether you like it or not, do you remain optimistic or not?
I remain optimistic with one element, which is science. Science is moving forward incredibly rapidly in many directions, which can and will probably help humanity. This being said, this science, as always, can have a huge benefit, but needs to be controlled, regulated, and if possible, not weaponized.
Pascal, I mean, I have many more questions, but next time, I hope. Thank you, sir. Pascal Lamy speaking at the Global Cybersecurity Forum in Riyadh and ending this show with at least some degree of optimism. Well, that's it for this episode. From me, Riz Khan, and the team, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on the programme, as Israel and Hamas make a final push for a ceasefire and hostage release deal, the agonising wait for news of the hostages continues. Coming up, we'll have the latest on those talks, plus we'll be speaking to one woman whose cousin remains a hostage. Despite reports of progress on those talks, Israel has intensified its shelling on Gaza, where at least 62 people are reported to have been killed during the last 24 hours. Lebanon's new Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, calls for a new chapter without foreign interference. He says he's reaching out across the political spectrum to form a government to get the country back on track. And the authorities in Los Angeles County hand down lengthy prison sentences to those caught looting in areas that have been evacuated. This as a result of the massive wildfires in the area. Hello and welcome to the programme. After nearly a year and a half since the war in Gaza began, a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas looks like it could be imminent. Well, Israeli officials initially announced that Hamas had approved a deal for a formal announcement, but the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has since denied that claim. That's according to the Times of Israel. Well, as well as pausing the war in Gaza, which has been raging for 15 months, a ceasefire would also result in an exchange of hostages and Palestinian prisoners between the two sides. Well, despite reports of progress on this deal, Israel has meanwhile intensified its shelling on the densely populated Gaza Strip, killing at least 62 people in the space of just 24 hours. Well, perhaps nobody is more keen to hear the outcome of these negotiations than the loved ones of the hostages who are being held by Hamas. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Ashley Waxman-Bakshi, who is an Israeli-Canadian YouTuber whose cousin has been held hostage by Hamas. She joins us now from Tel Aviv. Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. A truce in Gaza would, of course, lead to the release of hostages. And I'm guessing that for you and your family, This long drawn out wait for a conclusion to the talks must be absolute agony.
It is. We've been through an emotional roller coaster, obviously since October 7th. We've been very close to a deal before, and then it's fallen through. And often the media has said that we're close to a deal, when in reality we weren't close to a deal. And so until we see them home, until I see Agam home, I won't believe it until I see it.
Now, your cousin, Agam, who you just mentioned there, she was 19 when she was captured. She's now 20, so she's obviously had to celebrate one birthday at least in captivity. When was the last time you had any news of her?
So the last real news that we've had of hers is, I believe it was like day 53 of the war, when we had the previous release of hostages. So it's been well over a year. And what we knew at that point was what the released hostages who had been with her had told us about her whereabouts, that she had been kept in homes with families, that she had been in the tunnels, what she did get to eat on some days, what she didn't get to eat on other days. So we know about the conditions, we know about abuse, we know about, what you can imagine from hearing hostages tell what it's like, being held captive.
Has anyone told you anything, any of the authorities speaking to you, about who's on the list of hostages that will be released in this first phase of an eventual ceasefire deal?
So what we know is from the media, actually. I think we shouldn't know, I would hope that things would be kept confidential. And if anything, I don't like how on the media, everyone's like rushing to say, this is the list and this is what we've heard, because we don't know what's accurate. And there's a lot of, conflicting stories also between different media sources. I get my information from Israeli media, but also I follow your media, Al Arabiya, because, we want to hear what other people are reporting, as well as the BBC and whatnot. Sometimes the reports are conflicting, which is really difficult for us families. And also when it's such sensitive negotiations, we don't want things to be leaked. We want the deal to go through. And so oftentimes we're worried that if things are leaked to the media, that it will cause either side, to change a position or to retract something that it had offered. So what we know is basically from the media, and I don't know how much of it is true or not true at this point. So we're still waiting for something official. The last I've heard, and again, this is from the media, is that the deal might be signed today or tomorrow, or even as far as Friday. But again, I'll believe it when I see it, and I'll believe it when I see them home.
Yeah, indeed. Covering the story has been very confusing as well, because we keep being told that the deal is about to be signed, and then we're being told that there's some sort of a last-minute hitch or something along those lines, which has meant it's been delayed. So that word imminent, I agree, it's been overused with regards to this deal. Let's go back to talking about your cousin. She's been in captivity now for 15 months. And I'm just wondering, have you spoken to people about what it's going to be like for her, reintegrating her into a more normal daily routine? I mean, it's going to be really difficult, isn't it, for her?
Absolutely. I mean, we've never been in this position before. When I say we, I mean as a country, of receiving hostages that have been away for so long. We saw the psychological and physical trauma of the hostages that came back after 50 days. And so we have no idea what to expect. We do know, if you remember the 6 hostages that were executed in the tunnels, I think it was about 2 months ago at this point. So one of them, her name Eden Yerushalmi, she was weighing only 53 pounds. That was what her body had weighed. She had lost like 40% of her body weight or something like that. And so we have no idea what kind of physical state they're going to be in. God forbid, if there was any sexual assault, what the results of that, might have been. I don't want to, go into detail. I think everybody can understand what I mean when I say that. The psychological trauma. And, even I've been speaking to my husband about this. I'm a cousin. I'm not, an immediate relative. I'm not her parents. I'm not her sisters or brothers. And so even I don't know, should I be, going to the hospital to visit her in the first coming days? Is that going to be too much? There's going to be so many people who want to see her. I'm dying to see her and hug her, but I want to do what's right for her. And so I know there's a lot of preparation right now in the hospitals in terms of the physical aspects and the mental aspects, but none of us really know what to expect at this point.
Sure, and I can see from looking online that you've been really active, trying to sort of keep up the pressure, I assume, to keep the attention shone on your cousin and the other hostages being held. Been doing lots of interviews. What other sorts of things have you been doing to try to make sure this story doesn't sort of fall out of the news cycle?
I mean, just keep doing what I'm doing and interviewing and sharing. And I think, this war really is such a tragedy from all sides. Every human life, any innocent human life that is lost, any person that is taken hostage, it is a tragedy. And we should hope, for all of us and for mankind, that in 2025, we shouldn't be seeing things like this happen. And I am a big advocate of peace, and so is Agam and our whole family. And we have always been advocates of peace. And it's really disturbing for me, and I've been using my platform to call this out, the people who have been protesting or demonstrating a certain thing around the world, how are they contributing to peace? The calls on the street are not for peace. When you ask for an immediate ceasefire, but you don't ask for the release of hostages, that is not a call for peace. You used the word truth when we began this interview. I don't see this even as a truth, because we should be not moving towards a ceasefire. We should be moving towards peace, real lasting peace, so that no innocent person needs to be harmed or killed in this region, and so that we can move forward to real peace with our neighbors. This is what we want. This is what we want as a nation. This is what I want as Ashley. And so I've been trying to use my platform to kind of bring that story back to, let's calm the hate. It is so easy to choose a side and to hate another side right now. But how is that helping? How is that helping either side? So I've been trying, it's difficult. It's difficult when you have a family member who has been taken hostage and, my husband's cousin was murdered at the Nova Festival. It is really difficult to choose the path of peace when you have been directly affected. But we are still choosing that path because we know that the only way my children will be safe, that I will be safe, that my grandchildren will be safe here in Israel is if we have peace. And that's what we want.
Yeah, you make some really good points there. And there are people in Israel who think that even this phased approach, these talks that are taking place now, which begin with a 16-day ceasefire, some hostages are released, then a more permanent arrangement, more hostages are released, and then a more lasting arrangement. But there are some people in Israel and probably in other parts of the world that don't think the Israeli government should be negotiating at all. I mean, what do you say to people who have that kind of opinion?
My master's degree happens to be in counterterrorism. And one of the first things we learned is that you don't negotiate with terrorists because you incentivize, keep doing it. You're going to get what you want. And so I completely understand. But there's theory and there's reality. And in reality, there is no other way. The military operations, how many out of 251 hostages, how many were we able to get back through military operations? I think it's been like 6, something like that, maybe 7. There's, the only way we got people back was through a deal. And innocent people need to come home. There is no way that I, as an Israeli citizen, could live here and raise my children here, knowing that the government didn't do everything to bring the people home, right? It makes complete sense. How could you raise your children in a country where the government says, no, we don't negotiate, we don't do anything, that's it, we'll just sacrifice our people? That doesn't work like that. And so I understand, because again, like I say, in theory, it's true. We shouldn't be negotiating with people who take people hostage. But our values as a country, Jewish values, means that we don't leave people behind and we bring everyone home. And I am completely opposed to the government officials that are saying that. I can understand when people go to the streets and protest. We live in a democracy and everybody has the right to say what they want. And I also agree completely with the family members who are protesting this deal because their family members are not on the initial list. I understand them. Nobody can judge a family member. Everybody's worried about what will happen, in the future, in the second phase of this deal that's supposed to happen. Will it happen? And it's supposed to be so far away still. Even if we're looking at this first list of the 33 hostages, and again, this is from what I'm seeing on the media, the last hostages in this first round will only come home in about 6 weeks. It's still a long way away of psychological trauma, of lack of food, of the conditions, of whatnot. And so I understand why there are people protesting against this deal. I can selfishly say that I'm in favor of it because it's not only my cousin. If we can bring one person home tomorrow, then I will be in favor of it. Those are my values.
Yeah, indeed. And you talk about this, agonizing experience for the captives, the psychological torture that they are undergoing, and also, for you as well, and for the extended family of each and every one of them who all have loved ones who want news. What will it mean for you to have Agam back home?
Well, first of all, I don't think we're going to stop there because we're going to have to continue fighting for the rest of the hostages to come home. That's first and foremost. But let's say once all the hostages are home, and once there is really a ceasefire, I think only then we as a country can rebuild. We can start healing from this trauma because as long as we have hostages, we can't heal from the trauma of October 7th. People say, last year sometimes to me, or in 2023. And I look and I go, what? Last year, 2023? We're still living it. It's not something that ended October 8th. And so, people have to understand there's still, I think it's about 60,000 or 80,000 displaced people in Israel that need to return to their homes, whether it's in the south or in the north. There's still so much healing that we need to get through. But as a nation, I think I'm kind of looking at this war almost like our second war of independence. We kind of have this feeling like everything is going to start new and again. And we have a new, an opportunity to make a real difference in the Middle East right now. And going back to what I was saying before, I am the biggest supporter of Abraham Accords. I would love to see more countries join. And I think that really is, we have this, after devastation, after war, that's when you make peace. And I really do think that we have a unique opportunity right now where we can bring real change, especially with the change in government in the United States and so forth. So as difficult as this past year has been, I am very optimistic for the future.
That's really great to hear. And just talking a little bit more about your cousin, Agam, she's presumably had to grow up a lot during these last 15 months in a way that she would never have imagined, no one would have imagined. But knowing her as you did, you last saw her 15 months ago, how do you think she will have coped under the circumstances that she's had to endure? What kind of a character is her? Tell us a little bit more about her.
Well, I'm sure she has a good sense of humor and she's a funny person. So I'm sure she kind of, if she wasn't alone, if she was with other captives, I'm sure she kind of turned to kind of trying to make the best of the situation by trying to stay funny and optimistic as a 20-year-old probably would. She's strong. She's very strong, and she has a very strong faith in God. We know from the released hostages that she was praying, for her on her food, on the little food she was receiving. She was praying to God all the time. And so I'm sure that faith has been keeping her strong. We have been praying. We have been sending her our prayers and our good energies. She's a very spiritual person, and I'm sure that has been helping her. But in terms of her character, there was that video that we saw from October 7th when they were taken, when you had the terrorists in front of them speaking to them, and they came to her and she had blood on her face. And they said to her, "Where are you from?" And she answered Tel Aviv. And that was like the only thing she answered. She was in complete shock. She's not even from Tel Aviv. I think she was in such shock. She just said Tel Aviv. I think that, knowing her, I think that shock probably, went away after a day or two until she realized where she was. And she's strong. She's very strong. And she knows how to take care of herself and handle herself. And, she knows how to have a temper as well. And so have faith in her that she knew how to take, she knows how to take care of herself and she's strong. But after 15 months, you don't know. You don't know how your loved ones would react. You don't know how you would react. And so only once she'll be home, I'll be able to answer that question a little bit better after she shares with us her experience.
I can imagine how hard it's been. And just to sum up, really, does it feel sort of like you're trapped somewhere between hope and despair? Is that roughly how you'd say you felt at this particular moment?
You said it perfectly. We are trying to cling on to hope, like with our nails, you know what I mean? Like just to cling on to it because it's so easy for it to slip away. But we're holding on. We're holding on.
Well, we wish you all very well. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Ashley Waxman-Bakshi, thank you very much indeed. Well, for more, we can speak now to Mogens Lykketoft, who is the former president of the UN General Assembly and who joins us from Copenhagen. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, sir. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that a deal is on the brink. It sounds like it's imminent, but it's a confusing picture. What do you make of these reports?
Well, I still think, do we dare hope that there will be a ceasefire in Palestine? I mean, this draft more or less has been there for many months. And in between, we have seen this extremely devastating campaign against the people and the whole infrastructure in Gaza. And as you mentioned, even now, at the brink of an agreement, some say, we see this murderous attack on civilians in Gaza going on.
Yeah, as you say, this deal has been on the table for months, since May of last year, in fact. And we've got these mediators from Qatar, Egypt and the United States, as well as representatives from Israel and Hamas involved. I mean, why do you think it's taking so long?
For me, it seems obvious that the reason for this cruel delay, I would say, is the internal disagreements in the Israeli government, where the hard-right anti-Palestinian parties have been demanding a continued campaign. And I observe that some of them still are saying the same things. So that's why we all are in doubt if it will actually happen and if it will be the necessary opening for a huge humanitarian effort to the people of Gaza who have suffered so much. And the beginning of something like a political solution, at least that other forces will be present after some time in the Gaza Strip to protect the people there. I hope really that in continuation of an eventual ceasefire now, that both Arab countries and European countries will put enormous pressure on a solution where there will be protection force for the civilian people in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, it's tremendous suffering, as you say. More than 46,000 people have been killed there in Gaza these last 15 months. Lots of obstacles on the route towards arriving at a deal. We keep being told there's this obstacle or that obstacle. Of all the obstacles, do you think there's one that's perhaps proven to be the most complicated, which is why we're just still not getting this firm answer that the deal has been struck?
Well, I see no more important reason than the belief in some parts of the Israeli government that they need to make a total annihilation of Hamas in Gaza and don't mind if their hostages will be brought out, as it has been, of course, a central effort all along between the negotiators to end this hostage crisis, but also free some of the very many thousand Palestinians that are jailed in camps in Israel. But I think there's another dimension on this, which is very, very important and frightening. That is the war, the ongoing war Israel is fighting against the United Nations with their ban on UNRWA. UNRWA is the best equipped organization to bring assistance to the suffering people in Gaza. And it's a very big problem in organizing the right and sufficient support that the best equipped organization, the most experienced organization in this are hindered in working for the war. And I think also there should be a much stronger pressure from the international community with the Arab and Muslim world and Europeans in front to change that decision of banning UNRWA. It's a very, very sad and dangerous for the people of Gaza if this happens.
Sure, and let's just go back to the deal itself. It's going to be a phased deal, we're told, at least 2 phases, as far as I can understand. What's your understanding of how a phased deal will work and what it will entail?
Of course, the risk of a phased deal is that both parties can jump out and say all the assumed conditions are not fulfilled, and the fighting is starting again. That's the risk. So we really need the whole international community to keep the parties to this agreement, to the both the content and spirit of the agreement, so that we avoid new further killings in Palestine.
Sure. And okay, when phase 1 is over, I think 6 weeks go by, then it's phase 2. I mean, are there any significant differences between these 2 phases?
I haven't seen all the details of this, and I think none of us are quite sure what the phasing is. But of course, the important thing will be that there is an immediate access for humanitarian assistance, and there's a phased withdrawal of Israeli military from the Gaza Strip.
Okay, and obviously once a permanent ceasefire is arrived at, and there's this permanent withdrawal of Israeli soldiers, we think, what happens then? Because, I mean, there's going to be a huge rebuilding operation in Gaza, and that's going to cost billions of dollars. Where's that money going to come from?
Yes, that's a very good question, because we seldom saw such a total destruction of a society like what has happened in Gaza. I think it's 70-80% of all buildings destroyed, all infrastructure, water, electricity. It will take very many billions, as you rightly pointed out, to make just a minimum of workability to a civil society in Gaza again. And I hope that the international community will stand up. I hope that the Arab nations in solidarity will join here, not only with financial support. I think the international organizations, we have international banks and so on, have to contribute. But I think also it's important that there is, as I understand it, the willingness from major countries in the Arab world to supply kind of a protective force for Gaza at the end of the process. But I'm very much in doubt if that will be accepted by the Israelis. I don't think it's included in any kind of agreement right now.
And of course, this 15-month-long war in Gaza has resulted in a lot of spillover. We've seen violence in the West Bank. We've seen flare-ups in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, as well as huge protests in lots of other countries as well. How much of an impact do you think a peace deal will have on the broader Middle East region?
I think there is, again, there is a huge responsibility on major Arab countries to keep on insisting of the respect for Palestinian rights to keep on insisting that it's not acceptable from international law that Israel is annexing parts of the occupied territories, and in that way keep open a road for Palestinian self-determination in one kind or another. Because there is a military conflict, a cruel one, terrible one, going on right now, but there is a very, very long road to go to establish equal rights, human rights perspective, and livable conditions for the Palestinian people. And the United Nations will have to play a major role here, and that's why it's so unlucky and so unacceptable that UNRWA is banned from the Israeli side.
And just lastly, I mean, what's your overall feeling? Are you optimistic that a deal will be struck and that Gaza will be able to rebuild?
We have to hope for that. I can't see where those people living under these terrible conditions should be able to go elsewhere. We have to support them, and we have to insist that this is their land and it has to be rebuilt. But it will be a long and painful process. And I think that in the balance between Arab-Palestinian priorities and Israeli power, it's very, very important that both, as I said repeatedly, both Arab countries and European countries weigh in on insisting on the rights for Palestinians, which are enshrined in any kind of UN resolution we have made over the past 80 years.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Former President of the United Nations General Assembly, Morgens Lukatov. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, ending more than 2 years of political deadlock, Lebanon has a new prime minister. Nawaf Salam now has the task of forming a government, while the presiding judge at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Salam was appointed by Lebanon's newly elected president, Joseph Aoun, after securing the support of 84 of the 128 MPs. Well, for more on this, we can cross now to Lebanon and speak to Diana Menhem, a Lebanese political strategist. Thank you so much for joining us, Diana. Lebanon's new Prime Minister-designate, Nawaf Salam, is, of course, in that job now. Is he the right man for the job, do you think?
Hi, Tom. Happy to be with you. Definitely, Nawaf Salam is the right man for a job. Actually, I can't think of a better person to take on this job. He's one of the best since a very long time to take on this position in Lebanon. He's a jurist. He was the president of the International Court of Justice. He actually just resigned from his position to take on his new responsibilities as prime minister. He's also a very well-versed diplomat. He was Lebanon's representative to the United Nations from the years 2007 until 2017. And he's also an academic. He used to teach for a very long while at universities. He actually was my professor back when I was a student at the American University of Beirut. He's known for his integrity. He is known for his principled position, and he is known to be a reformist. So lots of hope for the Lebanese with the prime minister. The first indication of what he plans to do, of his policy priorities, was given yesterday in his speech. And this is a speech that met the expectations of the Lebanese, that gave a very clear idea over what he thinks is important in the upcoming phase. Lots of priorities, including restoring Lebanese sovereignty, kickstarting reforms, kickstarting growth after a very long period of stagnation, and, of course, leading on a massive reconstruction effort after the war. I hope that he will be able to deliver. But until now, all the ingredients are in the right place.
Sure. I mean, everything you say is extremely, it paints a glowing picture of him. And it's really rare, isn't it, in Lebanese politics to find someone that everyone rallies around. Now, President Joseph Aoun has chosen, as we've been saying, Nawaf Salam, to fill this role. Some saying that is a blow to Hezbollah. But I'm wondering why they're saying that, because, of course, the Prime Minister of Lebanon is always going to be a Sunni. Why are they saying it's a blow to Hezbollah?
It's a posture, right? There's no doubt that this new leadership, be it the president or the prime minister, are heralding in a new era for Lebanon, a new repositioning for Lebanon in the region. This is a glimpse of what political life might look like outside of the so-called axis of resistance. You can feel that people are hopeful. You can feel happiness, and you can feel relief on the streets. It's not a blow in a sense to Hezbollah, but yes, it signals a repositioning. This is not the prime minister that they would have wanted. This is not the president that they would have wanted. But for the constituency of Hezbollah and for the Amal movement, I think these are the right people in the right places, because these will be the people who will be able to lead on the reconstruction effort in the upcoming phase, to make sure that people will go back to their homes the fastest possible. And these are the people who will make sure to uphold the ceasefire agreement that was signed with Israel in order to prevent us from sliding into further wars in the future. But of course, we should be wary of over-optimism. This comes with a lot of challenges. The first immediate challenge definitely will be the formation of a government. Definitely Hezbollah and Amal movement will try to capitalize on their political capital in order to try to get as many gains in this government as possible. There are key positions like that of the finance minister that they will try to hold on to. They've had it for so long. So this is a very big challenge in this phase. The second challenge is for this government to align on a common roadmap. This will also be a big milestone. And of course, after that implementation, it's very important also for Hezbollah and Amal movement, but also their allies, not to have a blocking third in this cabinet, because it will mean that they will be able to break the cabinet at any moment.
Yeah, so you're making it sound like there's been a significant shift in power there in Lebanon, the balance of power. One of the things that we've heard Premier Salam saying is, my hands are extended to everyone, and that's seen as being a message to Hezbollah. What sort of things can he do to stop them from feeling excluded?
I mean, both the president and the prime minister were very clear, and also other political leaders in the country have been repeating this message of we are ready to cooperate, we are ready to work together with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has a huge constituency in the country, and no one can cancel them out. What can be done in order to support a reintegration of Hezbollah as a political party into political life in Lebanon is, first of all, make sure that they are fairly represented in this government. Of course, if they want to, they have signaled, until the moment they have signaled that they want to, but also in the upcoming phase, lead a fair reconstruction effort that will help get the constituents of Hezbollah and Amal movement back to their homes the fastest possible. There, of course, will be a lot of political files. There will be a lot of appointments in the upcoming period. And it's important to also here take into consideration not being over-aggressive against them. And also, there are elections that are coming up. There's a huge discussion on the upcoming electoral law. It's also important to make sure that this will be a fair electoral law that will represent all the Lebanese.
Okay, and just lastly, Diana, does it feel to you as a Lebanese national like this is the beginning of a new era for Lebanon after what's been a very, very difficult 4 or 5 years?
Absolutely. A new era. Something to look forward to. I haven't had this much hope in a political leadership in the country since I was a kid, probably. Since the civil war, we haven't had such a strong duo in the leadership. All the Lebanese are very excited about it.
Okay, well, let's hope everything works out for the best. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, Diana Menhem. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Now, turning our eye to the wildfires in Southern California, which are now known to have claimed the lives of at least 25 people. Well, those fires have also scorched an area the size of Washington, D.C. Well, as if the situation wasn't already tragic enough for people in those affected areas, now a looting spree has broken out in some evacuated areas. Well, police have announced charges against 10 people accused of burglary and looting. Police also say there have been cases of people impersonating firefighters in order to access the evacuated areas. Well, around 400 National Guard troops have been deployed to counter looters. The LA County Sheriff, Robert Luna, says that strict measures are being taken to deal with them.
Because we've seen hour and hour of people in our community suffering, losing their homes, losing their property. And just like everybody else, people are saying, hey, this is the reason I don't want to evacuate. I don't want to be victimized again. This is a strong message from all of us that we are here. So whether we are talking about burglary, looting, we're talking about scams, we're talking about the misuse of drones, whatever it is, we're going to get you. Do not make this worse than it already is.
The LA County Sheriff speaking there. Well, as local law enforcement and the California National Guard work to protect homes in the wildfire evacuation zones from looters, 2 local district attorneys are calling for more severe punishments for those caught looting. They've proposed legislation to make looting during a local emergency and felony punishable with a state prison sentence. Well, for more, we can speak now to Jerry Edling, editor for the KNX news radio station in Los Angeles. Jerry, great to have you back with us again here on Al Arabiya News. There are reports that high winds are threatening to reverse some of the hard-won progress in containing the fires. Just tell us what the latest is.
Yeah. There is definitely the threat of high wind. The Santa Ana winds have been touch and go lately. Firefighters did catch a break over the last couple of days, but now we have word that they may be a bit resurgent today. So once again, a red flag warning is in effect, and everything is very kind of tenuous right now. And as you mentioned, the looting problem is just more aggravation, and although that kind of minimizes it, but another headache for firefighters and for law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, as if it wasn't bad enough to have to evacuate your home, or maybe worse, to see it reduced to rubble, and now to have it looted as well. While you were talking, we were looking at surveillance video of looters in action. How widespread is the looting at this stage?
Well, it's very widespread. There have been incidents all the way through the fire, even when the fire was very close. But California has a history of this kind of thing. It resurged a couple of years ago. They had a lot of smash and grab looting in department stores, and that was blamed in some quarters by lax legislation. And so this has been a recurring problem in different sectors. I mean, this is in a fire zone. We had it in department stores before, very high-end department stores. And it just so happens that this fire came in one of the toniest neighborhoods in Los Angeles. So naturally, looters took advantage of it, and now law enforcement and public officials are calling for even life in prison. And that could happen under existing law, because California has a 3 strikes law, and a lot of these people are convicted felons already. So they hit a 3rd strike, and they're in prison for for the rest of their lives. So California is kind of moving to bone that up a little bit and send the warning to looters that it will not be tolerated.
Yeah, as you say, we're talking here, we're looking as well at pictures of what were multi-million-dollar homes. Some very affluent areas have been affected by the wildfires. And it is incredible to see the techniques being used by these criminals, dressing up in some cases, we understand, as first responders or firefighters. Is that something you've been hearing about?
Yeah, that's happened in a lot of cases, and it's very widespread in that area because keep in mind that the fire spread from Pacific Palisades to Malibu and literally covered what you might call the affluent crescent going up the coast, Pacific Coast Highway. And I believe Malibu was the site of one of those costumed looters. And, in all the confusion right now, it's kind of like a war zone because and you have the fog of war, literally, through the smoke in this fire. And it's very easy for a looter to get in with only sort of a hat and a raincoat or whatever, and move in and strike these very affluent homes. So it is widespread, and it's catching almost as badly as the fire itself.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, is there a feeling that the authorities are doing enough to protect people's homes?
Say again, sorry?
Is there a sense that the authorities are doing enough to protect people's homes?
It all depends on who you speak with. There are a lot of people who have been critical of public officials, particularly on the right, public officials in terms of their handling of forestry management and preparing for the fires. So, and then Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles, of course, was in a conference in Africa when the whole thing broke out. And so she's been under a critical eye. So for the most part, there is a lot of criticism of public officials, and it doesn't show any signs of letting up. Another thing they were concerned about is the lack of water, because at one point firefighters almost ran out of water in fighting the fires. So we can expect that to continue until they get sort of more of a master plan on how to deal with future fires.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fog of war and the confusion, but adding to the confusion seems to be information and misinformation. One of the rows playing out on social media, we've got the tech billionaire Elon Musk accusing Governor of California Gavin Newsom of, quote, encouraging looting by lying. He says that he's somehow decriminalizing looting. At least he amplified a tweet that suggested that. I mean, how widespread is this type of narrative?
I'd say depending on who you speak to, it's very widespread. I mean, California Governor Gavin Newsom has been sort of a lightning rod. He was during the campaign, during the Trump campaign, he actually offered to debate and all that, and he's been seen as a possible Democratic presidential hopeful. So he's kind of a weather vane as to criticism of handling the fires and handling the looting. And we also had a district attorney who was voted out of office, and he was widely criticized for lax enforcement of laws, especially for drug offenses and things like that. So there's a whole climate of people wanting, or specifically more conservatives, people wanting more stricter law enforcement, and they're saying enough is enough. And it's falling on Gavin Newsom's head. It's falling on pretty much the local fire chief. And so it's going to be raging as much as the fires in the coming days.
Yeah, and of course there are all sorts of conspiracy theories doing the rounds as well. Alex Jones, for example, has put up this idea that the fires are all part of a globalist plot, he says, to wage economic warfare and deindustrialize the United States. And on that one, Elon Musk replied, true. What are some of the more far out there theories you're hearing? I mean, are you hearing, or perhaps you don't pay any attention to conspiracy theories, but have you heard anything that's stood out for you?
You can pretty much get. I haven't seen all the conspiracy theories, but I do know that they have run the gamut. Everything from global warming, attacking global warming as a cause, and somehow all the officials have gotten together to sort of exacerbate the wildfires to make the point that global warming is real. And of course, they don't believe it's real. So it really, the fog of war is a fog of disinformation to a certain extent. And you can almost just imagine a conspiracy theory, and it's probably already been circulated on social media. Sort of there's nothing new under the sun.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Jerry Edling, editor for the KNX News radio station in Los Angeles. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
The green metal scenario, and why are those very, very important metals to the transition perhaps struggling to take off? And all of this, of course, is against a background of geopolitical shifts. One of those, of course, is what is going to happen in just a few days from now when U.S. President Donald Trump takes office once again. We've heard quite a bit from him over the preceding months during the campaign about the energy transition, about U.S. energy dominance as opposed to just U.S. energy independence. And, of course, the tariff situation. Is this a president that's going to really take China to task? And what, of course, that will mean for minerals generally. I want to kick off by posing that question to Bill Opplinger, if you would, just to weigh in on what you're expecting and what you see as the challenges ahead when it comes to the next 4 years.
Well, thanks for the question, Hadley. Just a little bit of background. I am the CEO of Alcoa, and would like to take a moment just to thank the Kingdom for another successful Future Minerals Forum. As we look forward to the next 4 years, we've been in business for over 130 years. We've worked successfully with all of the administrations over that 130-year time period. We will clearly try to understand what the tariff regime will be. We've had a tariff regime in place today. It's a 232 tariff that provides a 10% aluminum tariff, a 10% tariff on aluminum coming into essentially North America, and that has been somewhat disruptive of trade flows. But if we were to see massive tariffs coming in, especially that does not exclude Canadian metal, that could cause substantial trade flow changes in the industry. A significant amount of metal comes from Canada into the U.S. U.S. is structurally short aluminum, and if the Canadians were not exempted from a 25% tariff that would drive metal prices significantly higher in the U.S. and also could motivate metal coming from different parts of the world into the U.S., which would be completely disruptive to trade flows. So we'll be monitoring it. We'll be talking to the new administration and trying to make sure they understand the importance of having a competitive aluminum industry in the U.S. that also provides our downstream customers metal at a competitive price so that they can turn it into products for airplanes, automotive applications.
America's next energy secretary is doing his confirmation hearing today on Capitol Hill. You had a close relationship with the Biden team. What are you hoping to hear from him?
Well, we hope to hear from them that there will be an energy policy that is inclusive of many different sources of energy in the U.S., that positions the U.S. for a long-term, low-cost energy solution. One of the things that we've seen in the United States is that much of the aluminum smelting capacity has left the United States because energy has not been competitive over the last 20 years. When I joined the company back in the early 2000s, there was over 20 aluminum smelters in the United States. There are only 4 left, and they are pretty marginal facilities as it is today. So we're hoping to see an energy policy that encompasses all different forms of energy and provides low cost and preferably sustainable energy for the future.
Joe, you can take a longer term perspective on this one. When you look at what's happened over the last couple of decades with regards to the movement on the energy transition and what we've seen over the last couple of years and specifically, how worried are you that we could potentially see a setback in the move toward net zero just as a result of mineral prices, energy prices more generally?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the climate really doesn't. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here at the conference. It's been great to be back in the kingdom and see how it's been developing. This, I think, is really important, so thank you. On the topic of renewable and sustainable, I mean, see, if it goes to energy, you cannot escape the energy triangle. It's about affordability, sustainability, and security of supply. And I think every economy, every country needs to make its decision where it wants to be and have a long-term energy policy in general. So now, are we going to see a setback in terms of sustainability efforts? Well, time will tell. Time will tell. At the end of the day, you know, we need to look at green and sustainability, that it needs to be economically feasible.
Yeah.
If you only depend on governmental subsidies, you know, that changes in democracies, changes every 4 years. That's not the way on how you can build an energy agenda going forward. So I believe it's important that we time and again look at technology. How can we make sustainable energy, sustainable minerals, you know, economically feasible? That needs to be the task.
Yeah.
And then people will make choices.
In this part of the world, and particularly in the global south, questions have been raised for a long time now about the tough decisions that Western governments will have to make going forward. Their citizens want access to cheaper energy, and that may just not be forthcoming given the constraints that we're seeing today. Joe, when you take a step back and look at what's happening, particularly in Europe, obviously what we've seen over the last several years with the invasion of Ukraine, that's put a major strain on European governments. Are they going to have to be a bit more honest with their citizens about what's achievable in terms of the energy transition versus what is realistic and how much that's going to cost?
Yeah, see, that's been one of the biggest challenges which we have seen in Europe in general and in Germany in particular, that people had, or governments have not been honest about what it takes, you know, what the costs are for sustainable energy, for example. And if they always go back and say, well, we're going to help you afford the prices, that's a bad idea. You've got to actually go and say, what does it take? What innovation does it take? What technology does it take, you know, to bring the costs down and not subsidize the prices? Now in Germany we may have a new beginning coming up with the elections, but also the European Parliament, they need to become more practical, first of all, about what's possible. And what I really wish for the European Union is that they open their eyes and go to United States, go to the Middle East, and see what happens in this world, so that they understand, they are among communities and not just a bubble on their own with very little growth. And that would be the recommendation I would give to those governments. Go out and see the world, and then come back and make a plan for your own country. I love my country, as everybody loves their countries. I don't want Germany or Europe become a museum of how it used to be a while ago.
Yeah.
And that needs to be our goal.
Do you anticipate we'll see Germany return to nuclear power?
Well, I mean, look, the voters will decide, obviously, as they have decided in the United States. The good thing about Germany is we don't have a divided country, because look, in the United States you have 50% of the people are happy and 50% of the people are unhappy. That's maybe also not a great idea. So in Germany, I believe we will have a more economically focused, a more liberal, and a less ideological government, which I think is a good start.
Yeah.
And if they talk to people, who've seen the world, companies which business model is export model, they can get a lot of input on how to make things work.
Your Excellency, that's not something necessarily you have a problem with here in Saudi Arabia, particularly with the Vision 2030, which is well on its way. I want to ask you specifically about the green metal transition and frankly, how that is all evolving here in the kingdom.
Okay, thank you. I think you have heard, thank you, Bill and Joe, for what they mentioned about the current challenges that we are having. And you have listened today in the morning from our ministers, Minister of Industry and Mineral Resources, talking about the belief of collaboration. And maybe others, they were looking about competition. And this is very important that in Saudi Arabia, we are looking to collaborate with everybody in order to resolve these challenges. And the other one is His Royal Highness, Minister of Energy, when he talked about where is the real issue and the tight supply of metals and minerals that is foreseen in the future and need to be looked at from yesterday. And looking at this as a vision, and we are in Royal Commission, for example, focusing to unlock these challenges. I think the previous session they were talking about one of the challenges, the infrastructure and utilities and connectivity and all of these issues that we in Royal Commission in all of our 4 cities we are focusing on since inception. While the cities were planned, it's planned for the future, and now we are reaping the benefit of all of our plans when it comes to environmental and the security of supply, and when it comes to environment, for example, which everybody talking about, Royal Commission is leading in managing its environmental production and if there is any pollution to happen, and therefore we were winning global prizes for our industrial cities as green cities. And we are also continuing the effort to enable the green metal manufacturing by working with Ministry of Energy and the initiatives His Royal Highness was talking about when it comes to green hydrogen that we are focusing to execute in Yanbu industrial city. We are focusing into the carbon capture in both in the east and in the west. In the east, where to use it and inject it in the oil wells. and in the West, where we will use it for some downstream industries. We are also working into the recycling of waste coming from this industry, because there is a huge waste. I think Alcoa, you know, and in Ma'aden, partner, we are working with them now in multiple initiatives to find solutions with our universities and global institutions to really take care of all of this environmental issues, which is already by the public. It's known that metals and mining will have a negative impact to the environment. But I think to make it short, we have the great thing that we have a clear vision from our leaders that will enable us and the private investors in our cities to execute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How do you anticipate, Your Excellency, that AI will impact that plan? Because at the end of the day, we need this energy to power the AI boom, but at the same point, as you say, enormous amounts of waste come from that.
I think that's a great question, and we are now, when you look at the AI, I think we can look at it as a great consumption of energy, which will make us face a challenge for other sectors, but also it will enable us to be more efficient in production and in managing our cities. We have initiatives now. Already we have somewhat smart cities where we want really to go into having a smart city and adopting the Industry 4.0. We have a big program by Ministry of Industry to adopt it in helping the industry, either in metals and mining or in the petrochemicals, to make them more efficient. And I think we will be now working with, I am heading actually a company owned by Public Investment Fund. I am heading the board, and we are working actually the direction. I met with His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman twice for this, in order to take care of the environment and how we do the waste management and how we can utilize all the waste that we are generating. And already we are executing these plans either in mining and in other even public sectors.
I'd like to ask Nashad just to weigh in. I mean, when you think about green steel, almost a contradiction in terms, it would seem. But what is exactly the definition there of green steel? I mean, that is your name. And I want to understand from you just how, walk us through how you make that green.
No, that's a very good question, actually. You know, different people define the green steel in a very different way. As you're aware that the average, let's say, carbon generation in a steel is something close to about 2 tons, roughly on average. But on a process which is blast furnace process, it goes to 2.2, 2.3, more than that. Now, India has recently defined, for example, you know, the green steel, which is anything less than that, or they say that there are 5-star different categories which are there, the 5-star being 1.6, 1.5. But the world, for example, I mean, if you look at the process which is there, very common in Middle East, for that matter, you know, the electric steel making and the DRI, there we talk in terms of 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. Now, when we talk in terms of green steel, we really mean something close to about anything less than 0.7, 0.6, you know, that's the kind of thing which we talk about. And that, to my mind, is really, you know, a green steel. Although there is no definite definition which is there, which is accepted by the world, but that could be a reasonable number to kind of go for.
Yeah. You know. We talked a bit earlier on the panel about the politics of all of this. And obviously in the West, there is a certain narrative that perhaps the rest of the world doesn't necessarily subscribe to. In your mind, are we at risk of not achieving the goals of the energy transition simply because of the difficulty in supplying the energy that we need today, and particularly with the AI boom?
Yeah, I think it is, if you look at the good part in steel, for example, the good part is that the technology exists. Yeah. You know, how do we really go to that level? You know, that technology exists. And we know, for example, that if you want to go to levels like 0.7, 0.3, 0.4, something like that, we need to go for hydrogen. So that's one issue which is there, which we know very well. Now the question is hydrogen available today at prices which are something which can make meaningful change in the entire steel industry? Perhaps that's something where a lot of work is required to be done. And it's already happening in the world in some part of for example, you know that in Sweden there is somebody who is putting up a plant with fully hydrogen. Here we are in our own plant that we are wanting to build, that's going to be fully built based on hydrogen. So that's something which is really a very good news that, there are organizations and companies who are prepared to go through that route. And there are also obviously there's a lot of support which needs to be done for the entire supply chain scenario. For example, if you look at the supply, the hydrogen, if you look at the way that hydrogen is being produced, there is the electricity, there is a lot of electricity which is required to produce that. Yeah. Now, when you produce that electricity needs to be itself green electricity. And that's a lot of work which is already happening out there that, that with that electricity, how do you really produce that? And then how do you cut down that cost, bring it down to a level, which is manageable in that entire scenario. Yeah. So that work is happening. There is still a lot of work which is required to be done. Whether we're already there, certainly not. There is a lot of work which is required to be done. But I think the direction in which we are moving, that's a very positive direction.
Yeah. When you think about that momentum, Dr. Al-Malki, talk to me a little bit about how you see this not just taking place in Saudi Arabia, but also globally, because the cover of the FT, the main story today was about the Chinese commodities boom is over, and lots of worried about momentum more globally in terms of demand. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I will talk about the steel industries because there is a demand. Things are moving forward, but it is slow. And what we see right now, as of today, there is a struggle in moving forward toward achieving these targets. And I would like to comment on the green steel definitions, because as of today, this is one of the difficulties in my view. That's why we are struggling to move forward. There is no clear agreed definitions for green steel. Is it less than 0.6? Is it less than 0.3? Mm-hmm. So this is an issue for not only the producer, but also for the developer of the technology to focus on optimizing a technology that is going to achieve that target.
So if we're going to have green commodities, green metals, we should agree on what that actually means.
Yeah. Look, whenever we talk about green metals, the picture is bigger than the producer only. So it's involved even the end user, the customers. Are they willing to pay the premium for this? Because achieving these targets is not going to be easy, and it's going to come at a cost. The producer margins right now, they are small and will not be able to cover all the green initiatives that gonna introduce to the existing industries and the new manufacturing facilities that's gonna be there. So having this into the pictures, we have to include everyone. It's also the lawmakers that's gonna accelerate this as well. Yeah. Technology developers, that's gonna, right now they are focusing on achieving the target, not optimizing the process to lower the cost.
Yeah. This question I'd love to pose to both Joe and to Bill. The FT story on the idea that the Chinese commodities super cycle is over. How do you wrap your head around that in terms of your business strategy going forward? Bill?
Yeah. So if I can take a moment to give an advertisement for aluminum. Aluminum is an integral part of the solution of a greener world. Aluminum provides lightweighting for automotive, aerospace applications, you name it. Aluminum's infinitely recyclable. So if you make aluminum today, it can be in the world for the rest of all of eternity, and it's got good conductivity. So aluminum is a big part of the solution for greener metals. As I then look at the actual market for green aluminum today, so while our properties of our product help green the world, there is actually a low carbon market for aluminum today. So over half of the metal that we sell in Europe as of now is considered low carbon aluminum. In that particular instance, we get a premium price of only about 1%. So if you think about metal price all in today of about $3,000 a ton, we may be able to drive a $30 per ton premium. And the reason for that is there is an excess supply of low carbon aluminum as it is defined today. We have an offering, our competitors have an offering. What we're seeing is that the demand is asymptoting up quickly, especially in places like Europe, where at some point the demand for low carbon aluminum will outstrip the supply. And at that point, there will be pricing that will allow producers to invest in low carbon aluminum so that they can actually get paid for producing low carbon aluminum. At which point there will be a drive for ultra low carbon aluminum. Today we make aluminum that's sub 5 tons per ton of carbon per ton of aluminum. Our customers are starting to ask for ultra low carbon aluminum. In order for us to make that step change, there's going to need to be a technology breakthrough. We've been working on that technology breakthrough with our partners, Rio Tinto, for quite a while. We're building some of those cells today, and we hope that in the next decade, we should be able to provide ultra low carbon aluminum.
And so what's happening in China today in terms of the demand picture, how are you looking at that?
So if we bring it back to China, China has stated that they're going to hold to a 45 million metric ton cap. They are very high carbon emitting aluminum. So if we were ever to get to a situation, and Europe is taking the first steps here, where you would have a carbon cost associated with aluminum. Today we make aluminum at 5 tons per ton. Your average Chinese production's at 15 tons per ton. So if you had a $50 carbon charge per ton of carbon, that gives a $500 advantage to low carbon metal. So over time, if the world were to transition to actually having a global price for carbon, it will steepen the cost curve and provide an incentive to invest in low carbon aluminum.
And Joe, just to add to that, I mean, when you take that step back and think about what happens next, obviously we have the Trump administration coming in Washington. We could have the possibility of a tariff war, but on the back of that, you have a new reality in China, and that means that there is perhaps going to be a more stable and lower growth going forward. How concerning should that be for those looking at the global economy today?
Well, I mean, look, the world is more than China. First of all, China obviously being the highest emission country in the world on CO2 emissions as a single country, so that economy needs to chip in. I believe ideally we would have a global carbon pricing, but unfortunately I don't see a path towards that, because you've got developing economies, you've got industrial countries, and the debate will go on and say, well, you polluted the world, you become rich and famous, now why should we pay for what you actually screwed up? I believe there's got to be, China, there's got to be an understanding on how China and the world can gradually reduce emission. In my experience, the last thing you want to do is trying to push China too hard too quickly, because they will close up. So that's, look, if you go from coal to gas, it's about 40%, about give or take 40% reduction on emission already, which is, 40% less is a lot. And then you may take the next step, and then another step. And technology will help produce, let's say, hydrogen-powered gas turbines as a next step. So I believe the world is well advised to try to provide a path from today till 2030, like the Kingdom has done, or 2040. Energy and emission, it took us a long time to pollute the world, and it will take us a long time to clean it up. But don't push too hard too quickly, because people will close up and nothing gets done.
Yeah.
And His Royal Highness, by the way, today made a very important point, actually many points. But I think the single most important, he said, we need to work and think in ecosystems. And an ecosystem is a give or take. An ecosystem is go all the way from the beginning to the end. For example, if talking minerals today, right? Mineral Forum. If the world goes all electric on mobility, only mobility, cars, trucks, trains, we need 7 times the amount of mines as we have today. So what I'm trying to say is, if the world wants all electric, you need to look at the whole ecosystem from the beginning of the value chain all to the very end, and then see if we add it all up on how it compares. So practical, open, and then we'll need to have a path going forward. But without China, there's no way.
You allow me just to close, maybe my opinion about green metals. I think we are forcing initiatives that's nonsense, killing the industry. Talking about green hydrogen, for example, no commercial unit can be set up and it's economic with a high size in order to provide for steel plants, for example. I think we need to look at it, each sector to deal with their green initiatives. Let the energy do their part, and let the steel or metals to do their part, like carbon capture, what they can do with the carbon capture, or what they can do with the, for example, waste handling and recycling. You can enforce these things which is under their control. But forcing all of these initiatives in the industry, it's a killer. And I think this needs to be looked at. And we will be always in the Royal Commission looking at these constraints and make sure that we don't kill the industries with initiatives that is really, really not feasible for them at current stage, maybe in the future. And then we will do it, like, for example, energy efficiency program that we have. We went into stages to apply these targets on the industry, not to kill them. And now they reach to a high, really, standard of energy efficiency in their plants. Thank you.
Unfortunately, Your Excellency, our time is up. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me